to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. And this time we're doing both Kings Lucky 7. I'm trying to find new ways of saying that.
There you go. That's good. I like Lucky 7.
How's everybody doing today?
Very good. It's the 60th anniversary of the adoption of Canada's flag. And we are all wearing it everywhere because some people don't understand subtlety.
I will have to apologize if I sound a bit tired because I just went from a vacation, quote unquote, in the north. So I came like 30 minutes ago. So apologies. I'm drinking coffee now, and I'll be awake all night because of that. But I don't really care.
This is Tomer bragging about his wild college youth days while they're still going on.
It's not
right.
really youth.
He came 30 minutes ago and he's doing the show.
Hey,
it's not really youth days when it was with my family.
Dude,
I wish it was with other people.
Take the win. Brag. It's fine.
Yeah.
I just do the show from under my parents' behind the scenes. I've gone upstairs to read a book.
Yeah, but look at the room you're in. Everybody can see you from 100 yards away.
I mean, there's only one other guy in the room with me.
Is he hot?
All right, we got a comment already. Matt White says, members of the Senate, in this bill, I propose that every morning all schools listen to commentary from Tomer.
Damn right. Damn straight. Someday I will do an excessive commentary on the scrolls. I shit you not.
Kip's gonna have a lot to say.
Yeah, I noticed that Mark is missing. That's too bad.
Yeah, he would.
I'll have to reach out and find out what happened to him. Yeah. So
Well,
who's reading
hopefully
today?
He's doing all right.
All
You know,
right.
I suppose I can do it.
Did you read before?
Yes, I've read before. Yes.
Well,
at least a
I
couple
think
times.
So maybe Lilith should do.
Did Lilith volunteer ahead of?
Well, I would be remiss in not taking a turn. It's been a little while. But
Yeah,
as I said last time...
You're one of those kinds of girls who take turns. Okay, nice. Sorry.
Oh, God,
Only if
Lawrence.
you've been very good.
Yep.
Yeah. Do we have an intro to the next couple of chapters at all? Or it's one thing is it's a continuation, right?
It is
right. Yeah, the first continuation.
Yeah.
We left on a bit of a cliffhanger.
Well, this time,
Not really.
what is it? No, last time in 2 Kings, famine besieged Samaria, and 2 women argued over whether or not they should cook and eat both their babies or just one. We now return to the story in progress, 2 Kings.
Yeah,
7.
that's about right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they were under siege, literally, so, Now, since this disaster is the Lord, and the king's like, why should I wait for the Lord? Since he's obviously a punk-ass bitch. And Elisha said, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says. About this time tomorrow, a seah of flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. The officer on whose arm the king was leaning said to the man of God, look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of heavens, could this happen? You will see it with your own eyes, answered Elisha, but you will not eat any of it. Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, why stay here until we die? If we say we'll go into the city, the famine is there and we will die. If we stay here, we will die. Let us go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, then we die. At dusk, they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. And when they reached the edge of the camp, not a man was there, for the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses, and a great army, so that they said to one another, "Look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us." So they got up and fled in the dusk, and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives, because that's what armies do. The men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp and entered one of the tents. They ate and drank and carried away silver, gold, and clothes and went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent and took some things from it and hid them also. Then they said to each other, "We are not doing right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait till daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once and report this to the royal palace." So they went and called out to the city gatekeepers and told them, "We went to the Aramean camp, and not a man was there, not a sound of anyone. Only tethered horses and donkeys, and the tents left just as they were." The gatekeepers shouted the news, and it was reported within the palace. The king got up in the night and said to his officers, "I will tell you what the Arameans have done to us. They know we are starving, so they have left the camp to hide in the countryside, thinking they will surely come out, and then we will take them alive and get into the city." One of his officers answered, "Have some men take 5 of the horses that are left in the city. Their plight will be like that of all the Israelites left here. Yes, they will only be like all the Israelites who are doomed. So let us send them to find out what happened." So they selected 2 chariots with their horses, and the king sent them after the Aramean army. He commanded the drivers, "Go and find out what has happened." They followed them as far as the Jordan, and they found the whole road strewn with the clothes and equipment of the Arameans had thrown away in their headlong flight. So the messengers returned and reported to the king, and the people went out and plundered the camp of the Arameans. So a seah of flour sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley sold for a shekel, as the Lord had said. Now the king had put the officer on whose arm he leaned in charge of the gate. And the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died, just as the man of God had foretold when the king came down to his house. It happened as the man of God had said to the king. About this time tomorrow, a seah of flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. The officer had said to the man of God, "Look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of heaven, could this happen?" And the man of God had replied, "You will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it." And that is exactly what happened to him. For the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died. The word of the Lord.
You know, it's funny that half the miraculous thing already happened before they got there. And that would be like, this hearing of they would hear like horses over like the hills or something like that. So this again is lending credence to the idea that God had his own army. So we're gonna see it later, actually. We're gonna see it. Well, maybe not you and I, but someone in the story is going to see the entire cavalry, and that's going to be a bit later on. I forget which chapter. But the thing is, they obviously confuse it with it being the horses of the Hittites and Egyptians. But no, instead it was
which were the biggest powers for quite a long time in that area.
Yeah, especially.
Well,
and they were always told, like, the Israelites themselves were always told, like, don't get help from Egypt, or we're going to see that more definitely in Isaiah. So that to me is interesting, that half of like the miraculous thing had already happened, and then the rest of the prophecy just like, the rest of the prophecy just comes true. That's all he was talking about, was that the famine would end, right? That's what that means. That like, because the thing is, the stuff that he's talking about here, a measure of choice meal shall be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel. Those sound like pretty normal things. Compare that earlier in verse 20, in chapter 6, verse 25, where it said the famine in Samaria became so great that a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver, and 1/4 of a cob of dove's dung for 5 shekels of silver. So, like,
Right.
absolutely
Saying, like,
terrible things for expensive prices, but then these absolutely normal good things for cheap. So that would be signaling the end of the famine, which we do see by the end.
I would want to know who was selling. I thought they were just mindlessly rampaging and taking all the food out of the tents. The
If I can make that
story,
much off of a dove's dung, hell yeah, I'll.
I mean, I've already
Yeah, the
noticed
prices
this is
would-
probably a reference to like carob trees,
Yeah,
carob
we
fruits or
mentioned,
something like that, or it's
Yeah,
basically
carob.
like
Dried
a
carrots, yeah.
a synonym for a low quality fruit or something like that.
I think
Works
also
for
the
me.
word
I'll
sounds
spell that too.
similar.
Capitalism.
Yes, I mean,
Yeah.
the implication is there was so much food, everyone was able to just go to the city, to the camp and take whatever they wanted, that the price of food like collapsed. So if you wanted to buy, if you went to someone was selling something because, maybe some people couldn't go by themselves to the city or they had too much. They tried to get rid of some of it. They couldn't get a good price. It was very cheap. And this also implies, by the way, that this was a small town, not a massive city, that the one army camp, leftovers would fill up the city. Yeah.
would give people enough food to be frivolous after famine. I love how there's so much repetition in the additional story of how the one guy died because he dared to question the prophet.
Yeah. It's like, here's the end of the story, but no, we're gonna add like six more verses just to like repeat ourselves.
Yeah. Because remember, don't
Yeah.
question the fucking prophets.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I should start. We'll start on verses 1 and 2. Sweeney comments, Verse 1 employs the typical forms of the call to attention, hear the word of Yahweh, and the prophetic messenger formula, thus says Yahweh, to indicate that the anticipated word of Yahweh arrives. The following oracle indicates how food will become readily available once the siege is lifted. A se'ah is a measure of uncertain size, although the Septuagint texts suggest it is equivalent to 1 1/2 modi, or modai, or 1/3 of a bushel. The officer questions Elisha's statement, beginning with his observation that Yahweh will open the windows of heaven, which is an idiomatic statement that Yahweh will bring rain and food to the land, as we see in Genesis 7:11, Isaiah 24:18, and Malachi 3:10. Rain is not at issue at this point, but the reference ties into the larger theme of the narrative polemics against the Baal by claiming that Yahweh and not Baal is God of creation and bringer of rain and food, as we see in 1 Kings 17-19. The question, shall such a thing happen, indicates the officer's doubt in the prophet. Elisha's response that his eyes will see this event, but that he will not eat the food, points to the coming confirmation of his prophetic statement in verses 17-20.
Steinzelt says that the Asea is slightly more than 21 liters, or about 5.5 bottles of Mountain Dew for you Americans.
Yeah, Cogan also says that it
Anything
is...
but the metric system.
Cogan also writes that the SEA measure is around 7.3 liters.
7.3 liters?
Yeah.
That's quite a bit less. I mean, Schneider's might be saying it based on, like, the Talmudic sale or something like that.
Yeah, probably, maybe. Okay, on verse 3, 4 men with leprosy. Rabbi Yochanan, in Talmud Sotah 47a, taught that this refers to Gehazi and his 3 sons, an identification accepted by most traditionals. Fritz writes that their disease is the reason why they are still outside the city, given that they are considered unclean and were excluded from the community of the city, while being cared for outside its walls. He notes Werthwein's opinion, quote, It is difficult to imagine what exactly their present situation would have been, end quote. And Hens-Piazza comments, quote, 4 lepers who bear the social stigma of marginalized and ostracized persons are unexpected agents witnessing to the divine intervention. It is ironic that those afflicted with a disease that excludes them from society become the heralds of the good news that will restore that same society to health. The lepers are the ones who make known the supply of life-giving food that will reverse the life-threatening effects of famine. Such a turn of events seems more often than not characteristic of God's ways. The powerless lepers are the agents of the all-powerful God, whereas the leadership of the powerful general of the king diminishes as he is trampled to death on account of his disbelief. Such reversals bid for our attention and reflection on who are God's instruments of life and well-being in our own time, end quote.
It's interesting because there's 2 ways to take that. The better way is to be all, God uses the humble and the meek and lifts them up by making them the instruments of his mighty works, because they don't have much in this life, so they deserve a break. Whereas it very frequently, actually, God says that basically I'm using this poor, weak, pathetic person so that there's no way you can give credit to anybody but me. Which is delightful.
I guess. Okay, on verses 4 and 5, McKenzie comments, the real options boil down to a choice between certain death and possible life. Entering the city means death by starvation, if not execution. Staying put means death when the city is attacked. The only course that offers any hope of survival is to surrender to the Arameans. If that strategy fails, they will be no worse off than if they had gone into the city or stayed put. So they reason. The time frame is not entirely clear, since Baneshef in verse 5 may refer to early morning, as we see in 1 Samuel 30:17, Jeremiah 13:16, Psalms 119:147, or late evening in Isaiah 5:11, 21:4, Proverbs 7:9. Their conversation suggests that it is the latter, since otherwise they would have to get up quite early in the morning to hold it. They may be using the darkness to facilitate their departure from the city and to hide their disease, and thereby improve their chances for survival among the Arameans, end quote.
That is actually an interesting point because, the whole point of a siege is that the city is locked down tight. Nobody's getting in, nobody's getting out. The idea that they've been there long enough for people to be eating their own babies and just been sitting in the no man's land between the army that hasn't killed them for some reason and the city that hasn't let them in because leprosy is a bit weird. It very much smacks of, we had to come up with an excuse for these guys. So leprosy.
And here I was looking for a punchline this whole time. Like these guys are going to come out and say, we left a little piece of ourselves back in that lovely little town.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh God. How many people walking over?
When this is a joke from someone said in the chat, I don't know if you saw it. It was like when they came back to the palace, they announced to the king, "Oh, those men with the funny faces and bells are here." And he's like, "What? The jesters?" He's like, "No, lepers."
I mean,
But I think the idea of lepers with bells is more like medieval Europe. No,
I guess.
yeah.
It seems that over here they just like kept them out of the city. They didn't let them.
But didn't they have
come
to
in.
still be like unclean, don't come near, and you could ring a bell.
Yeah.
It would be easier than shouting all day.
Yeah, man. Yeah, but I don't know if they had like bell foundries and stuff like that.
Well, no, it would be more
A
like
tambourine.
Just anything that's noisy.
Okay, so on verse 6, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us. Cogan notes that hiring a third party, which is not directly involved in the conflict that led to the war, can turn the battle in favor of the hirer. We know of several instances of such cases. The Ammonites who hired the Arameans against David in 2 Samuel 10:6, and Isaiah's objection against Achaz, who wished to corroborate with Ashu when he was under pressure by Retzin and Pekach in Isaiah 7:20. Sweeney takes the Hittites to refer to a number of Neo-Hittite kingdoms in northern Syria, such as Chalchemish, Hamath, and others. Fritz, however, takes the Hittites to refer to the Old Hittite Kingdom, which already fell in the 13th century, and thus takes the reference to the King of the Hittites as an anachronism. And McKenzie comments, quote, "The reference to these two great second millennium empires is ill-suited to the 9th century setting of this story. It has been explained by positing that Hittites refers not to the 12th century Neo-Hittite Anatolian power, but to small Aramean states that retained the name, according to Bui, or by echoing Winkler's proposal that Mitzrayim, Egypt, be read or understood as referring to the northern Anatolian kingdom of Musri. However, as early as 1961, Tadmor argued forcefully that evidence for the existence of Musri as a kingdom is wanting. The reference to Hittites and Egyptians is rather, quote, an old literary image of little value for historical purposes, end quote, according to Gunkel.
I mean, wasn't Egypt somewhat known for their chariots?
I mean, they do, but
I mean,
like...
I think the Hittites were probably... I think the Hittites were Indo-Europeans, and they were the ones who kind of introduced chariots to that area. So I think the Egyptians and the Babylonians would have got them. Well, what was before the Babylonians? The Assyrians?
In those days, chariots would have been a significant technological thing in war. It's interesting extrapolating when this was written versus when it's set, because as you say, it's set in the 9th century, but it's very much not written then. I do wonder too if the myth of the manna in the wandering in the desert was part of the consciousness at that time when it talks about opening the floodgates of heaven, or if it was just the standard image of the fertility gods bringing rain.
I think when it comes to like opening the windows of the sky, that I think that would more likely refer to rain, or just like because the thing is, one of the common artistic motifs in the ancient world was like windows in which a king or a god would be giving the people food or drink. So like there's a especially famous one, which I'm forgetting the name of, but it was of Akhenaten, and he was like standing at this window and he was giving things out to his subjects. So like the thing is, those two ideas are like related, right? So not just the manna from heaven, but also this. So it's I mean, I'm not sure exactly if it refers to a single one, but it certainly plays into the same exact motif that both of those stem from.
Well, and I am inclined to think it's more likely to be rain, considering that the floodgates of heaven was also seen in the flood myth and various other things, and you know, the entire earlier when you had the "oh hello my pretty baby," oh you get all the chin scratches, shush. But when you had the flat earth behind you with the dome and the idea that the gods literally, you know, opened rain gates, and you know they had apparently mechanisms for that.
Yeah, like significantly, even Baal, like one of the earlier myths about him, he one of the first things he does after building his heavenly temple was or he actually, I think it says like somewhere that he gave that he had windows built in heaven during the construction of his temple. So
he wanted to look out so people get rain.
Okay, on verses 9 through 14, Sweeney comments, quote, Although the lepers are outcasts in Israelite society, they are still Israelites and feel obliged to inform their king and people that the Arameans have fled. The portrayal of the king's response to this very good news is a key element in the narrative. Namely, he refuses to believe it and supposes that it is an Aramean ruse designed to lay a trap for the Israelites. This depiction puts the king on a par with his officer, who refuses to believe that Yahweh will act on behalf of the people. See 2 Kings 7, 1 and 2, and compare 2 Kings 7, 17 through 20 below. Such a narrative strategy points to the larger concern to demonstrate that the king, and indeed the entire Amrite line, is unfit to rule Israel. Only when one of his soldiers suggests that the last 5 horses be used to send out 2 chariots on a scouting mission does the king reluctantly relent. The suggestion highlights the desperation of the Israelites, who were down to their last 5 horses from the once powerful Israelite chariot corps.
Do you know, or Lawrence, do you know if this story was related to any specific recorded historic conflict?
This specific one, I haven't heard about it. If we have like other records of it.
The reason I ask is because Hezekiah encounters a similar thing with an army besieging the city, and the Lord drives them out with a miraculous actually he kills them all in the night with a miraculous angel, and the battle is won, and but historical records from the actual king he was fighting, and also trapped in the story, show pretty clearly that he had stopped paying his tribute and then had to buy them off with all the gold in the temple, and also according to the records of the other king, gave 3 of his daughters as concubines and a whole bunch of other tributes. So basically, they decimated the entire nation, besieged the capital city, and he bought them off, and then they left. But the narrative in the mythos of Israel is that the Lord struck down their armies because blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
and
that was
they
when they
just
couldn't. Yeah, that was when they couldn't take over Jerusalem, right?
Yeah. But it has the same dynamic of just one night the Lord strikes and the army is gone, which is, as opposed to they were bought off and finally left because it wasn't worth it. Which doesn't make Yahweh look too good.
Yeah, I couldn't find any historical reference to this event. So okay, so on verse 13, sorry, Isaac wanted to say something?
Oh, I did. There is a comment, but
yeah, sure.
All right, so Trevin Wright says, what exactly was the equivalent or value for a shekel worth mentioned in 2 Kings 7, verse 1 in ancient Israel, and the role money played in the narrative of or outcome of a conflict?
So, I mean, shekel is a weight, and how much exactly it was changed over time, and even the Bible, records different values and weights.
Yeah, the shekel of the king or
the temple shekel.
Yeah, there's different types of shekels within Israelite culture as well, but it's more like it's pretty much a weight that was used in that area. There's I think even the Akkadians.
Because the only thing I know of the economy back then was that female slaves were half price, and male slaves were young
2/3.
Yeah, trying to figure out the economy is difficult because when a story happens and when it's written can be different, so it can affect values. So sometimes you can see things as a shekel is worth as low as three days of work, but sometimes it's it could be 10 shekel a month. It's very.
Tomer is still using this currency. So how much do these things cost now?
And they've changed over time as well. The new shekel.
It's new Israeli shekel, and one is worth $0.3 at the moment.
Really?
Yeah. So like $1 is equals 3.5 shekels.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when it was like 8 shekel to the pound, and it was like you went to
So
Israel.
slaves
you
are really
exchange
cheap
money.
now.
Yes,
Yep.
yes, they are. I can vouch for that.
Oh
Um,
God.
Yeah, more or
Yeah,
less
I
it
was
changed
bought
over
by that
time,
money.
and it was. I think the one that we know the best about is probably the one that the Hasmoneans, because they actually minted coins, and so we could actually. I think we've actually found like weights from then, and I think it was like 11.5 grams of silver, something like that.
I mean,
for 1 shekel.
the first money was measured out by weight for
Yeah.
several reasons, among which being that they didn't mint and it was harder to, cheat someone. But at the same time, I can understand it. Like at this point in time, I don't know what that would come out to in a dollar amount, but inflation does make it a hard question to
Yeah.
answer because
Yeah.
ancient Israel or ancient anything is
Yeah.
pretty varied. But
Yeah.
if you're
Yeah.
talking about shekels in terms of a day's work or 2 days work or a week's work, then that's, I
It's
guess, puts it in
helpful.
some kind of practical perspective.
Yeah,
And
it's
the thing
helpful,
is,
but then
it's-
again, it's like
Sorry, go ahead, Isaac.
I was gonna say, like, you compare it, like the cost of living is different, right? So you can get paid a certain amount, and then you're like, yeah, but then like bread or flour costs this much, and it's like, it seems that compared to nowadays, like you can't really compare to like how much people make now to how much they made back then.
Fair enough. Yeah,
Mm.
$50,000 a year used to be a good money, and now it's just barely living.
Yeah, it's hard to do like some sort of equivalency for like, the modern dollar, let's say, and like any ancient currency, because like not only because of inflation, but also because the economies were just so different and were based around entirely different things.
Yeah.
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 Okay, so on verse 13, their plight will be like that of all the Israelites left here. Yes, they will only be like all these Israelites who are doomed. In the Masoretic text, the phrase which remained in it are all the multitude of Israel, in Hebrew, asher nish'aru ba hinam kechol hamon Israel, is repeated. Although this repetition is found in Targum, which reads, behold, those are like all the crowd of Israel who are left in it, and if they perish, behold, they are like all the crowd of Israel who have come to an end, it is absent from most early translations and many Hebrew manuscripts. This has led many scholars to take the repetition to be a ditography. McKenzie adds that it seems to be a gloss on Hanish'arim, those who are left, explaining that the horses left in Samaria are the only ones remaining in Israel, and Asher Tamu, that have perished, is an expansion on that gloss.
Yeah, this bit seems a bit weirdly written. Like
Yeah.
they like, oh, we have some horses left, send them, and then they send a different amount.
It does sound very forced and weird. I mean, the excuse of, hey, if they die, they'll be no worse off than the rest of us is fine, but also like we're going to send out some soldiers, not to be rude, but being sent into danger is literally their job.
Yeah. On verse 14, 2 chariots with their horses. The Masoretic text reads 2 horse chariots, in Hebrew shnei rechev susim. Although this reading is preserved by the Targum, Septuagint reads 2 mounted on horses, and Peshitta 2 pair of horsemen. This reading is favored by Josephus in Antiquities 983 and Kimchi, who writes that out of the 5 they have taken in verse 13, they have chosen the best 2. Likewise, McKenzie renders 2 mounted riders and writes that the Masoretic text is probably under the influence of Rechev in verse 6. And Vulgate has 2 horses. And finally, 18 through 20, these verses repeat Elisha's prophecy given in the beginning of the chapter. Sweeney notes that verse 19 quotes both the words of the officer and the words of the prophet to demonstrate the fulfillment of Elisha's word. This has led many scholars to take these verses as secondary. For example, McKenzie writes that these verses are, quote, pedantic and probably derived from a marginal gloss, end quote. Fritz writes that the addition, like the section of 632 through 72, is, quote, part of a redaction whose aim is to make the prophet the focus of the story, and moreover, to relate the events back to the will of Yahweh alone." End quote. Cogan writes that if this is not the case, then the verses are meant to remind the moral of the story, an interpretation given by Ibn Kaspi.
Is that
Now,
it then, Timur?
I have one Christian
Okay.
though. Ephraim, who writes that the officer prefigures the fall of the people of Abraham, those who could see the bread of life descended from heaven, quote unquote, but without profit.
Prophet or prophet?
Profit.
Okay.
And by announcing goods
Thanks
of
for clearing that up.
Yeah, by announcing goods for the inhabitants of their city, the four leprous men fittingly represent the four holy evangelists.
Oh, jeez.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. All right, I'm going to read on the next one. So 2 Kings 8.
Yeah, read up through 15.
15?
Yes.
Okay. Now Elisha had said to the woman whose son he had restored to life, "Go away with you. Go away with your family and stay for a while wherever you can, because the Lord has decreed a famine in the land that will last 7 years." So God plans for people to starve to death in this region. He planned that in advance. So if you're going to live here, you're going to starve. You got to go someplace. Why? Okay.
Because mysterious.
Yes. The woman proceeded to tell. It's almost as if it was written after the famine happened. But anyway, the woman proceeded
it's
to do
literally
as the man of
the
God
chapter after the famine happened.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
depending on
woman
your
proceeded
view,
to
yeah.
do as the man of God said. She and her family went away and stayed in the land of the Philistines 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, she came back from the land of the Philistines and went to appeal to the king for her house and land. The king was talking to Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, and had said, "Tell me about all the things Elisha has done." Just as Gehazi was telling the king about how Elisha had restored the dead to life, the woman whose son Elisha had brought back to life came to appeal to the king for her house and land. Gehazi said, "This is the woman, my lord, the king. This is her son, whom Elisha had restored to life." The king asked the woman about it, and she told him. Then he assigned an official to her case and said to him, "Give back everything that belonged to her, including the income from her land from the day she left the country until now." Elisha went to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, was ill. When the king was told, "The man of God has come all the way up here," he said to Hazael, "Take a gift with you and go meet the man of God. Consult the Lord through him. Ask him, 'Will I recover from this illness?'" Hazael went to meet Elisha, taking with him his gift of 40 camel loads of all the finest wares of Damascus. That seems a bit much. He went in and stood before him and said, "Your son Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, has sent me to ask, 'Will I recover from this illness?'" Elisha answered, "Go and say to him, 'You will certainly recover. Nevertheless, the Lord has revealed to me that he will in fact die.'" He stared at him with a fixed gaze until Hazael was embarrassed. Then the man of God began to weep.
Just like
"Why
Jesus.
is my Lord weeping?" asked Hazael. "Because I know the harm you will do to the Israelites," he answered. "You will set fire to their fortified places, kill their young men with the sword, dash their little children to the ground, and rip open their pregnant women." Hazael said, "How could your servant, a mere dog, accomplish such a feat?" "The Lord has shown me that you will become king of Aram," answered Elisha. Then Hazael left Elisha and returned to his master. When Ben-Hadad said, "What did Elisha say to you?" Hazael said, "He told me that you would certainly recover." But the next day he took a thick cloth,
Oh
soaked it.
God.
Hold on, Aaron.
Wait,
Aaron.
Aaron,
We can
you're-
barely
Is it
hear
up
you.
to 15?
No,
Yeah,
no,
we can
just your
barely hear you.
microphone. We can.
Why's that?
I
I
think
have
maybe
no idea.
StreamYard.
All right, well, let me try it again. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can.
But the next day he took a thick cloth, soaked it in water, and spread it over the king's face, so that he died. Then Hazael succeeded him as king.
Yeah, so obviously, he waterboarded him.
Obviously.
That's what happened.
I have to say, it's giving off very Macbeth vibes. Very, you serve the king, but you will become king, but we don't know how. But oh, it's so tragic.
Mm.
This is another archaeological figure. So, I mean, obviously, we already had Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, and now his successor, Hazael. And he is, I think he's mentioned by Shalmaneser III, and of Assyria, and or is it Sumeria? I don't remember. And some say that he's possibly the author of the Teldan stele, which also mentions.
And Matt White offers a comment. He says, Aaron, all credit to the work of Tomer, yet why do we need so much commentary for a divinely inspired text? Wouldn't we expect the meaning to be blatantly obvious?
You know, he's right. Maybe I should stop doing commentaries. Thank you, Matt White.
I don't think that was the intended message.
Yeah.
You stay right there, Tomer. You're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
It's a good point.
But yeah, God is ineffable, but also not the author of confusion. So if you're confused, it's because you're of Satan.
How do you know that God is ineffable? Have you tried to F him?
I haven't.
Technically, we always F him, right? Because he's everywhere.
Oh, yes.
I told him to F off. Does that count?
Yeah.
Okay.
Spiritually. Yeah. Should I start, or did Isaac
Yes, go
want to finish his? Okay.
That's all right.
So I'll start on verse 1. The notice that Elisha spoke, Diber, to the woman suggests that he spoke to her 7 years prior, according to Rashi and Kara. Though in the story told in 4:8-37, we did not find Elisha giving these instructions. The famine is mentioned in 4:38 and is presupposed throughout 42-44 and 6:24-7:20. Traditionals, like Rashi and Kara, identified the famine with that during the days of Joel, son of Pethuel, in Joel 1. Fritz notes that while there is evidence from other sources that people would try to flee from food shortages caused by crop failures, as we see in Ruth 1 and Papyrus Anastasi 6:51-61, this appears to be the exception rather than the rule. To leave one's ground meant giving up one's property, and in case of abandonment, land would be confiscated as the king's property. Rabbi Yochanan, in Talmud Ta'anit 5a, lists the things they ate during these 7 years. Quote, in the first year they ate that which was in their houses. In the second year, that which was in their fields. In the third year, the meat of their remaining kosher animals. In the fourth year, the meat of the remaining non-kosher animals. In the fifth year, the meat of repugnant creatures and creeping animals. In the sixth year, the flesh of their sons and their daughters. And in the seventh year, the flesh of their own arms, to fulfill that which is stated, each man shall eat the flesh of his own arm, in Isaiah 9:19.
That's nothing. This morning I've eaten 3 toes off my right foot. Sorry, quoting a movie.
Obviously.
Yeah. Okay, on verse 2, the land of the Philistines. Cogan notes that although the land of the Philistines is south of Samaria, and apparently hotter and drier than it, there are years where the famine does not hit the southwestern part of Israel, since rain goes from the north to the land of the southwest, as we see in Genesis 26:1 forward. And Sweeney comments, quote, The woman's choice of Philistia as a place to live is curious, given Elijah's objections in 1, 2 through 4 to Ahaziah ben Ahab's attempts to seek medical advice by inquiring of the Philistine god Baal-zebub in Ekron. There is no suggestion that she had done anything wrong, but her choice to live in Philistia for 7 years recognizes Elisha's authority as a prophet of Yahweh. Her temporary residence in Philistia functions much like other narratives in the Elijah and Elisha traditions that point to Yahweh's power over foreign nations, as well as over Israel and Judah, such as Zarephath in 1 Kings 17, 7 through 24, Mount Horeb in the wilderness in 1 Kings 19, Moab in 2 Kings 3, and Aram in 8, 7 through 15. These narratives play an important polemical role since they demonstrate that Yahweh, and not Baal, holds sway over the nations outside of Israel and Judah. End quote.
It's important to remember, and again, this isn't a problem if you're not a fundamentalist, but it's important to remember how many of these things are just, necessary narrative inserts. Like, oh, we need someone to find the camp empty. Who could possibly be the lepers? Lepers would work. It's very, which again isn't a problem if you're not being all like, this is the literal word of God and every word of it happened exactly as it says, and if you don't think that, you're gonna burn in hell.
And by the way, Isaac, I seem to have cut you off earlier. I did not mean to. I apologize for that.
No, it's okay. There was actually some noise here, so I had to mute myself.
Okay.
Lots
So
of
M.
too many
Doug offers a
kids.
comment. I'm sorry?
There's lots of children, so there's a bit of noise sometimes coming up and down the stairs.
M. Doug offers a comment, says, offers £5. He said, did the period of the biblical kings supposedly occurred during and under the rulership of the
Achaemenid. No, it happened before. Sorry, it happened before the Achaemenid Empire. The Achaemenid Empire started at 550 BC, and the monarchic period happened during 745 through 587 BCE. And
right, there was a like a province of the I always forget how to pronounce it. The Achaemenid Empire. I think it was even called like Medinat Judah.
Yehud Medinata.
Yeah, that's
Yehud
Yehud
Medinata.
Medinata. Yeah, that's it.
Which literally means the district of Yehud. So So on verse 3, she went to appeal to the king for her house and land. The exact legal basis for the Shunammite's claim is unclear. Cogan asks, quote, did the land move to the king's ownership because of its lack of work? Did she settle on the land as a tenant, and by neglecting the field, the land returned to the public? Or did the cultivated lands pass to the ownership of the kingdom? End quote. McKenzie notes 4 explanations that have been posed for her appeal. 1. The land was confiscated by the king, since he is the one to whom the woman appealed and who ultimately returned it to her, according to Alt, Gray, DeVoe, and Hens-Piazza. 2. The king granted the land as a fief to a servant as a reward for loyal service. Fief, sorry. According to K.H. Henry. 3. The land was taken by members of the woman's husband's family or clan, according to Rem. And 4. The land was being worked by sharecroppers who refused to surrender it upon her return, according to Shanda, and traditionals explain that the house was occupied by robbers. He writes that none of the explanations is conclusive, especially if the woman in the legenda was not the Shunammite. End quote. No, the quote. On verses 4 and... Sorry.
Isn't this Gehazi the same one that was given leprosy? It seems like these stories are at the very least out of order.
Yeah, it seems like it. I mean, it seems like a continuation of chapter 4. Right.
Yeah, and then the stories inserted in between. It's
all over the place.
The timeline seems very fucked. It's like Marvel Cinematic Universe levels of fucked.
Yeah, I mean it needs to be like after the story of the if you want to say that Gehazi was one of the 4 lepers, this has to be after that story. So yeah, it doesn't really make too much sense.
That seems to be a separate what is it
Idea,
called
yeah.
when the rabbis make up connections just to tie everything together?
Fan
There's a term
fiction? I don't know.
Well, yes, but
Teguts,
it's
I
more
think.
official. Kibbutz? Yeah, it seems
Teguts.
totes.
Yeah.
Different totes.
Basically the explanation, right?
I mean, they would have had to, with the number of people being either killed or captured, or in this case, cleverly running off before things all burned down around them. They must have had some method for dealing with the legalities of land left behind by persons of an unknown fate. And I know with the Holocaust, for example, the number of women or men who couldn't find their spouse, and like, were they free to marry again? And, the odds were that they were gone, but you could prove it, and then they'd have to get permission. And then occasionally the spouse did turn up, and it was a huge
It's still an
kerfuffle.
issue. It's still an issue. It's called an almana or almona, and it can, like, if a man just like leaves town and like no one knows where he is, he could easily be dead. The woman is technically married to him still, so it's like really difficult for her to get a...
Did you say it's amana or aguna?
Oh yeah, sorry, you're right.
It's
Aguna. Almana is a widow.
I had heard,
Almana.
Right? Yeah,
I had
sorry.
heard
Aguna.
that-
Aguna means is the...
Yeah.
some men will write their wives like if they're going off to war, they'll write their wives like a certificate of divorce, like a conditional divorce. Like, if I'm gone for more than 5 years, you're free, or whatever, or 2 years, or maybe just be a year, or I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's meant. I think that idea is mentioned in the Bible somewhere.
Right?
Like the idea of soldiers writing.
Yeah, it does.
Conditional divorce.
The bill of divorcement. Yeah, I remember.
Like a
I
conditional
remember
one.
I don't remember it being part of the Bible. The part in the Bible was that a man could not be forced to go to war for the first year of his marriage, because he should stay home and make his wife's heart glad. Which is
maybe it's not implicit. Maybe there's a story or something where it's like, how could this have happened? And then the early commentators explain this system. And try and say that it was applicable back then as well. To explain how that story could have happened. Like, how could she have, he disappeared, and she should have been under that system. And like, no, it's fine, because all the soldiers back then would give these conditional divorces.
Right. It's possible. Either way, the same thing would have to work for land here. If you have constant raiding parties and people being killed and dragged off as slaves and running away from armies, as you do, or famines, as you do, then how do we, when they turn up again, how do we make sense of this, and how do we vouch for who they actually are and make sure someone isn't trying to steal his neighbor's land?
It makes sense that they would have been thinking about this as an issue very early on. Yeah,
absolutely.
But I mean, it's a symptom of this, like, patriarchal system where a man has to give a divorce, and like pretty much a woman can't, like, if a man wants to give her a divorce, she can't really refuse it. He can literally like put it on the ground next to her and she's divorced. But like the other way around, it's like, if a man doesn't want to divorce his wife, the wife literally can't do anything about it.
Islam gets even more ridiculous with it, where you just have to say it 3 times. That's a slight modification on the older system, where only the 3rd divorce was final. But you just have to say it. Then, like, one guy was sleep talking and it sounded like he said it. They were like, "Are we divorced?" It's like, you could have just never told anybody that you muttered something in your sleep that sounded vaguely like "I divorce you."
That's interesting.
Okay, on verses 4 and 5, McKenzie comments, the reviser's familiarity with Gehazi from 4:8-37 and chapter 5 identify him as PN, or prophetic narrator. As in those previous stories, PN once more made use of Gehazi as a utility character in order to identify the woman in the older legenda as the Shunammite. The notion of a skin-diseased peasant having a conversation with the king is ridiculous on the face of it. But Gehazi's affiliation with Elisha as witness to the prophet's deeds interests the king and gives Gehazi access. For that reason, his skin disease does not limit his social interaction any more than Naaman's did in chapter 5.
Right, that's also true. The guy he inherited it from was also technically like an official. Maybe being a leper could mean different things, or like, I mean, we already know that it's not really talking about like leprosy. It's some other random skin condition. So maybe it was recognized, like you could have leprosy and be white, like maybe you had vitiligo, and then that wasn't treated the same as someone who had the actual leprosy thing where you had to be kept outside and then it would cure within a few days. It was like maybe it was a difference between like having a lifelong condition and having an illness.
God, just think of being a prepubescent or pubescent boy in Israel. Does the pizza face count as leprosy under those rules?
I can vouch for that, yes.
Oh, damn.
Though I've made some corrective cosmetics and now it's not really.
Yeah,
So
I mean it's
no
it's,
pizza
it's actually
face
good.
can get into the tabernacle.
No.
It's a good analogy because like if you scratch at your acne, whatever, you can end up with like actual like scars.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay, on verse 6, an official, in Hebrew, saris. The word already appeared in 1 Kings 22:9, where early translations and modern commentators took it as referring to a eunuch. Likewise, in this chapter, early translations and Kimchi render eunuch, with the latter explaining that although castration was not allowed in Israel, the kings of Israel had eunuchs either from foreigners or being castrated because of a disease.
What kind of disease makes you chop off your balls?
Syphilis? I don't know. No, syphilis is modern.
Yeah.
I guess there was something that.
wait, was
think I
did syphilis come from the Americas or was it the other way around? Did we take it there?
I don't know.
Something like that. It was
Okay,
revenge for the smallpox.
Yeah. On verse 7, Elisha went to Damascus. No reason is given for Elisha going to Damascus. Rashi, based on Talmud Sotah 47a, wrote that Elisha came to Damascus to cause Gehazi to repent. Kara and Kimchi wrote that Elisha came to anoint Hazael, as Yahweh told to Elijah in 1 Kings 19:15. Sweeney writes that Elisha's presence in Damascus, quote, provides further indication that Yahweh's power extends well beyond the land of Israel into the foreign nations that surround her, end quote. McKenzie, however, writes that 1 Kings 19:15-17 reflects an acquaintance with the edited form of 8:7-15, and that Elisha's journey and the encounter are highly improbable, quote-unquote. Likewise, Fritz comments, quote, the plot is clearly fictitious, as it pretends to know about events at the court at Damascus that took place with no witnesses. We can, for this reason, not assume that we are reading a historical tradition. The point of the story is rather to contest that Ben-Hadad had died a natural death. The narrator knows better. Hazael killed his predecessor in cold blood when he was ill, in order to usurp power. It is most likely that the narrative originated in prophetic circles. This would explain the link between the events and the prophecy of Elisha, end quote.
Yeah, I don't understand Rashi's thing where he like went to Damascus to bring back Gehazi, but like it doesn't say anywhere that Gehazi was there. He says he was talking with the king of Israel, not the king of.
We just have to accept that these narratives are not linear, and that like it's
like,
not
happening
like A, B, C, D, E.
It's just like, oh, why does Elisha go to Aram, to Damascus? And like Rashi's like, oh, because Gehazi was there. I'm like, what? Why? Like,
why would Gehazi be there?
Yeah, I know. Like, oh, the story before he was talking to the king of Israel. So obviously he must be talking with the king of maybe he's traveling the country, making money by telling stories about Elisha's miracles.
So he's on a speaking tour to kings. Sounds like leprosy is the best thing that ever happened to him.
On verse 10, you will certainly recover. The reading suggests that Elisha lied to Ben-Hadad so that Hazael will be king. To avoid the implication that Elisha was lying, the Masoretic text Ketiv reads, "You shall not recover," in Hebrew, "lo chayot techayeh," with lo in aleph meaning not. While the Kirei reading, "You shall recover," lo chayeh techayeh, with lo in vav meaning to him. Rashi wrote that Elisha said, "You will certainly live," to Hazael, who will live instead of Ben-Hadad and occupy the throne. Kimchi wrote that Ben-Hadad will recover from the illness, but he will be killed. Nevertheless, the Kirei reading is preserved in early translations. Cogan takes the Ketiv reading to be a late correction. Septuagint has Elisha saying, "Go, say to him, by life you shall live, but the Lord showed me that by death you shall die," reading mot tumat instead of mot yumat. Josephus in Antiquities 990 writes, Now the prophet, although he directed Azael not to announce anything bad to the king, said that he will die." Sweeney writes that Elisha's willingness to lie to Ben-Hadad raises questions as to whether or not statements made by the prophet may be taken as true.
So by death you shall die.
Yeah, that's Hebrew.
Yeah, that reminds me of Motorhead.
Yeah.
Killed by death.
Yeah. Where was I?
Yeah, I mean, I would have just read it as... Yeah, I mean, I would have thought the simple reading was like, tell him that he will live, but I am telling you that he won't live, he will die. So it's not that Elisha is lying, he's telling Hazael to lie. Oh, you're muted.
Honestly, sorry, it just the translation also seems awkward, because it would have made a lot more sense to say this illness will not kill you, because that is true. The illness does not kill him. His main guard does. He's assassinated, but the illness didn't kill him. So all you have to do is say that, and then technically it's accurate. So I'm wondering if the wording has been changed or altered through time, or the meaning of the words or something like that, because that's a pretty standard literary trope. Like I mentioned with Macbeth, no man born of women shall, shall slay you. Well, let the demons that you serve tell you Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped. Man being of no woman born, like it's very wordplay in prophecy. And because they always speak in riddles and poesy and yada, 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 it's a trope for a reason. You never know if they're trying to fuck you over.
Yeah, I haven't finished my comment. So...
Yay! Hey, it was relevant.
It was, but still. Sweeney writes that Elisha's willingness to lie to Ben-Hadad raises questions as to whether or not statements made by the prophet may be taken as true, as we see in Deuteronomy 18, 9-22, and 1 Kings 13 and 22. He writes, quote, "Ultimately, such a strategy suggests that even Yahweh might be questioned. See 1 Kings 22 and compare Job," end quote. Fritz, however, following Wuthwine, writes that the issues resolve when considering verses 10b through 13 as an addition, which, quote, "not only preempts the final outcome, but also offers a glimpse of the future, thus presenting the prophet as an omniscient seer," end quote. Likewise, McKenzie comments, quote, "Initially, Elisha's message for Ben-Hadad was positive. He would live. The older story then moved to verses 14 and 15. Hazael conveyed the good news to his master, but then took things into his own hands the next day, suffocating his king in order to replace him. The initial story affirmed Elisha's ability as a seer, able to divine through inquiry whether a sick person would recover, and it also painted Hazael, Israel's hated enemy, as a murderer and usurper. The addition led to the Kirei Lo, for the Lo in Ketiv, with Vav, in verse 10a, in order to make the two half-verses consistent. Verse 10b continued the change to a negative response by making clear that Ben-Hadad would die. Thus, Elisha's foreknowledge was complete and perfect. If Hazael did not already have the idea of assassination in mind, Elisha has just given it to him. In that case, verse 10b shows that Elisha was aware of what Hazael would do before Hazael himself did. End quote. On verse 10, he stared at him with a fixed gaze until Hazael was embarrassed. The Hebrew Bible reads, he ya'amed, his face, and he yasem, until embarrassment. The meaning of the verbs ya'amed and yasem are unclear. The word ya'amed is probably derived from the root ein mem daled, to stand, and so literally, he stood his face. Traditionals explain that he held in his expression of that he held in him his expression of grief, so that he wouldn't cry in front of Hazael. As Rashi explains, quote, he made a concentrated effort to stand and control himself, end quote. Likewise, Cogan takes he stood his face to mean he pretended. Septuagint reads, he stood before his face and fixed his gaze until shame. Vulgate, he stood with him and was troubled so far as to blush. Targum, he turned his face and waited for a long time. And the Lusanic recension, Hazael stood in front of him and sent a gift before him until he was ashamed. End quote. This reading is favored by McKenzie, who writes that the reading explains the verb vayasem, which is problematic in the Masoretic text because it lacks an object. It also explains the reason of Elisha's shame, i.e., the embarrassment of riches being set before him, and Peshitta omits this phrase. On verse 13, a mere dog. Septuagint and the Lusanic recension read, the dead dog, following other instances of this expression in 1 Samuel 24:14, 2 Samuel 9:8, and 16:9. Cogan, however, notes that as an expression of self-humiliation, the word dog can appear alone, as seen in the Lachish letters 2:4, 5:4, and 6:3, and in several Akkadian letters from several periods. On verse 15, a thick cloth. In Hebrew, it's machber, which is a hapax. Septuagint reads machma, because original. The word has been taken to refer to either as a blanket, as we see in Targum, Vulgate, and Cogan, a netting, according to Josephus in Antiquities 992, and Butseko, quoting Imejanach, who compared it with kavir ha'izim, a net of goat's hair, in 1 Samuel 19:13 and 16, a cloth, according to Rashi and Sweeney, a pillow, according to Kimchi, a bed cover, according to Fritz. Hens-Piazza and McKenzie take it as referring to either a cloth or coverlet, or a net, with the latter noting the word kavir in 1 Samuel 19:13 and 16, which refers to some kind of netted or woven cloth. Halot reads, something woven, cover, or mat. And finally, he spread it over the king's face. The most common interpretation is that Hazael murdered Ben-Hadad using the cloth, an interpretation found in Josephus in Antiquities 992, Ephraim, Kimchi, and most modern commentators. Some commentators, however, reject this reading. Rashi and Kara wrote that Hazael spread the cloth over Ben-Hadad's face to cool him off. Abravanel wrote, quote, by cooling him, the fever entered into his face, and he was quick to die. End quote.
Sure, Jan.
Yeah. Yeah. It did cool his body temperature down to what, 50 degrees?
Fahrenheit.
Yeah. Holding your head underwater for 10 minutes will cool you off too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
Satan 616 says, so the story is fictitious because there were no witnesses, but that cannot be. In the New Testament, those witnessing the emptying tomb were told not to say anything, and that totally happened.
Oh, yeah. With all the women except the one woman, but the 2 women and the 3 women, but the 5 women, and they all witnessed it and didn't say anything, but then said something, but then someone else. It's very consistent and believable.
I love how you put that.
I found better stories in my spam inbox.
So I know that above Vanilla. So McKenzie notes that the cloth may have been a means of relieving the king's fever, according to Shanda, or used as a bed screen or mosquito netting that also served for air conditioning, according to Gray. In this interpretation, quote, a servant came to refresh the netting by wetting it and replacing it, and in so doing discovered the king dead. End quote.
Yeah, I bet he wet it. I
Shut
bet
up.
he did.
Shut up. He writes, however, that the murder interpretation can be defended on 2 grounds. Quote, the first is narrative coherence. If Ben-Hadad's death was due to illness, there is no reason for the ruse in verse 10 or the detailed description in verse 15. The reader is led to seek some cause-effect relationship between Elisha's instructions to Hazael to lie to his master and the cause of the master's death, especially when Hazael had so much to gain and the circumstances surrounding Ben-Hadad's death raised the specter of foul play. The second factor favoring the interpretation is 1 Kings 19:15, where Elijah is commissioned to anoint Hazael king of Aram. Elijah does not personally anoint Hazael, or Yehu for that matter, but he does designate Elisha as his successor in 19:16 and 19, who commissions Yehu's anointing in 2 Kings 9:1-10. Elisha impels Hazael to murder and replace his lord in much the same way that he impels Yehu to assassinate and overthrow his. End quote.
Also, obviously waterboarded.
I'm not sure that it was wet with water.
So the good waterboarding.
No.
Not in my world, but whatever floats your boat.
What was
Oh,
that
I
safe
see.
word?
God. Oh,
I see.
We all
Safe
know.
word.
We
I know
all-
a
Let's have a-
I know
The
a
safe
good
word is
safe
red.
word.
Let's have a safe word.
I know a good safe word. Ach shtrapanim. That's a good safe word.
I don't think so.
That's the longest word in the Bible. So veha ach shtrapanim, but you have ach shtrapanim as well.
Oh yeah, that's in
Oh.
Esther.
It's in Esther. Yeah.
It's
Well,
probably a
Jesus did die on
Persian.
the cross because he forgot his safe word. We all know
It's
that.
probably a Persian word.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
So, but
it's a
but
Persian
when
word,
we
yeah.
get to that, we'll probably discuss
Yeah.
it. But we are
Yeah.
doing now.
It doesn't make any sense not to have been an assassination, though, especially not with the weeping and the Lord has told and the
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a character assassination of Hazael.
Well, of
we don't
course.
know. We don't know. Exactly.
Oh,
what-
I'm not
how-
saying what
how he-
really
yeah.
happened. I'm saying in the story, he obviously assassinated the king.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah, yeah.
interesting because you have a prophecy where it's like, oh, he's going to die, but then the person who hears the prophecy, because they heard the prophecy, does something different. So it's like, is it destiny? Is it free choice? Is it?
I said, don't worry about it. Oh, what's really going to bake your noodle later on is, would you still have broken it if I hadn't said anything?
Another movie quote. I
Um,
know which one. Okay.
You know. If you know, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, you can finish the chapter, Aaron.
All right, thank you. In
I'll
the
be able-
5th year of Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, when Jehoshaphat was king of Judah, Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, began his reign as king of Judah. He was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 8 years. He followed the ways of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab had done, for he married a daughter of Ahab. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He followed the ways of the house of Israel and married the type. But this is evil? Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
Israel.
no, because remember, the Israel was the one that they set up the golden calves, right? So like
Yeah.
they're the ones that are still, if you follow in the ways of the kings of Israel, you're evil.
They're
Yeah,
not
especially
part of
Ahab.
they're not part of the exclusive Yahwist cult, so they're evil. That's
Okay.
that's what evil means.
Yeah, this is like
Sure.
I think this is like the first. So we have like a Judahite king where it says like he wasn't great, and then this is the one where it's like he's actually bad, but he wasn't killed or whatever for it.
For the sake
Nevertheless, for the sake of his servant David, the Lord was not willing to destroy Judah. He had promised to maintain a lamp for David and his descendants forever. In the time of Jehoram, Edom rebelled against Judah and set up its own king. So Jehoram went to Zaire with all his chariots. The Edomites surrounded him and his chariot commanders, but he rose up and broke through by night. His army, however, fled back home. To this day, Edom has been in rebellion against Judah, and Libnah revolted at the same time. As for the other events of Jehoram's reign and all he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? I don't know. What are you asking me for? Jehoram rested with his ancestors and was buried with them in the city of David. And Ahaziah, his son, succeeded him as king. In the 12th year of Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, king of Judah, began his reign. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 1 year. His mother's name was Athaliah, a granddaughter of Omri, king of Israel. He followed the ways of the house of Ahab and did evil in the eyes of the Lord, as the house of Ahab had done, for he was related by marriage to Ahab's family. So now all you got to do to be evil is be related to evil.
Yes.
Well, my cult is better than your cult, and if you disagree, you're evil.
Gotcha.
I think it's saying because he married into the family, he followed their ways.
Oh, right.
Ahaziah went with Joram, son of Ahab, to war against Hazael, king of Aram, at Ramoth Gilead. The Arameans wounded Joram. So King Joram returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds the Arameans had inflicted on him at Ramoth in his battle with Hazael, king of Aram. When Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, king of Judah, went down to Jezreel to see Joram, son of Ahab, because he had been wounded. That's how it ends?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, God isn't Shakespeare. Apparently, he spent all of his artistic capital elsewhere and didn't put any of it in the Bible.
Yep.
Hmm.
Not very good judgments from this righteous judge either.
I mean, yeah, but what did you expect, really?
Mm-hmm. Do you want to read a comment before I start?
Yeah. Trevor and Wright says, what's the need for the famine in the story? What's the need for the suffering and the use of it as an example? Isn't this evil? One would think. But, there you are trying to use reason.
I mean, the famine, when we're talking about, like, the story of the Shunammite, right?
Or
Well,
the
there's that,
famine.
or the one before the Arameans flee.
Yeah.
I like, it's kind of like a mechanism for the event, as I can see it. It's like...
What I would say that, like, yes, it is a mechanism for the events, but it's usually meant to, like, move people places.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the point.
It's God becomes more problematic if you claim that he's inherently virtuous. See, that's the problem. If God is just mechanizing events, then he's, a puppeteer. If he's supposed to be virtuous at the same time, he's fucking failing epically.
Okay, so I'll start on verse 16. When Jehoshaphat was king of Judah, Rashi and Kara, based on Seder Olam Rabbah 17, wrote that Jehoshaphat crowned Yoram, who reigned for 2 years during his lifetime, when they returned from the war they had waged with the king of Moab. Although this phrase appears in the Masoretic text, Septuagint, Vulgate, and the Lucanic Recension, it is absent from the Peshitta, Vitus Latina, and in a few Greek manuscripts. and in a few Greek manuscripts disrupts the transition between the introductory subordinate clause of verse 16a and the main clause in verse 16b. Although he takes the phrase to be a gloss, I don't know who he was. Although he takes the phrase to be a gloss because of its formulation as a vav conjunctive clause, Cogan and McKenzie take it to be a case of lithography of the name and title of Yehoshaphat from the end of the verse, with the latter calling the phrase, quote, patently absurd in content, since Yoram could not have become sole ruler until his father had died, end quote. And Targum reads, Yehoshaphat, the king of the tribe of the house of Judah. And I'll just check who was he that I didn't have time to check my commentary, so I was at a vacation for the last 2 years, so not 2 years, 2 days.
We were on a break.
Okay, so so it's Sweeney. Sorry, it's Sweeney. Okay, so on verse 17, he reigned in Jerusalem for 8 years. Cogan dates Yoram ben Yehoshaphat's reign to 851 through 843 BCE. He writes, quote, according to the synchronism in 3:1, Yoram son of Achab ascended the throne at the 18th year of Yehoshaphat. If Yehoshaphat ruled for 25 years, as we see in 1 Kings 22:41, his son Yoram ascended the throne at the 8th year of Yoram son of Achab. But according to what's written here, Yehoram ruled for 8 years until the 12th year of Yoram in verse 25. This discrepancy is explained by assuming that Yehoram was co-ruler with his father during his last years, end quote. Although the reading 8 years is attested in most early translations, it is attested in most early translations, 2 Chronicles 21:5 and Josephus in Antiquities 9:102, Septuagint in Alexandrinus and Vaticanus read 40. McKenzie takes this to be erroneous since it doesn't fit with any chronological system, and perhaps resulted from adding 32, Yehoram's age, and 8. Some Lucanic witnesses read 10.
I love how consistent the numbers are in the Bible. It's just so reassuring.
And we can find secrets of reality by looking at those numbers, because they must mean something, and that's why they're always
that's when you have the Bible code, right?
Well, Bible code is a separate thing where it's like how, like, the number of letters,
It's
things and stuff like that.
Yeah,
like you can make a grid of the Bible by like having each row have, let's say, 50 letters, and then now that you have your grid, you can like do crossword and like and then find words that are like written down or diagonal in that grid. It's really stupid, but
yeah, that sounds pretty dumb.
Yeah, because you can just change how many letters are in a row, and and there's like really silly things like like the word twin near the word towers in like
somewhere in the vicinity of letters that also represent 9 and 1, so could be
and it's like, it's so great that there's prophecy that you can only find after it's happened.
This isn't even the artistic prophecy that you don't know until it's being fulfilled. Eowyn of Shield Maiden of the Rohirrim, I am no man, and stab. That at least is badass.
See, I get that reference.
Yeah, I know. Nerds unite.
Would be problematic if you didn't, I think.
I don't. Okay, so
so Gematria is just say that what I was talking about wasn't Bible code, but Gematria, which is a much older idea, and I think it's literally Greek. It's a Greek word, and gamma tria. Gamma is the third letter. Tria is 3.
Okay, on verse 18, he married a daughter of Achab. Verse 26 identifies her as Athaliah, daughter of Omri. Thus, Peshitta reads Achab's sister. Gersonides wrote that she was the daughter of Achab, but sometimes she's associated with her father and sometimes with her grandfather. Cogan writes that daughter can also indicate a granddaughter, much like son, Ben, can indicate a grandson. Thus, Laban, son of Bethuel, son of Nahor, in Genesis 22, 22, and 23, and 29:5. Sweeney writes that her designation as daughter of Omri likely reflects a dynastic identification. He notes that the Assyrians referred to northern Israel as the house or land of Omri, long after the fall of the house of Omri. Shalmaneser III even refers to Yehu as son of Omri. Hens-Piazza writes that the intermarriage between the two royal families suggests ongoing connections between Israel and Judah that are not without consequences.
Oh, is that where the idea of Yehu being like a great grandson of Omri comes from? Like the idea that is it Nimshi was a brother of Ahab?
I
Because
guess.
of this idea that he which is weird because like we'll get to it, but it seems to be that he's supposed to be destroying the house of Omri, but actually he's only destroying the house of Ahab. But
Yeah. On verse 19, McKenzie comments, the negative evaluation of Jehoram leads to the statement in verse 19 about Yahweh refusing to destroy Judah for David's sake. The verse is a theological assertion on DH's part of the validity of the Davidic promise in face of the indications of his sources that Judah experienced Omride rule for a time, in addition to Athaliah, whom he did not consider legitimate. The word Nil has the metaphorical sense of dominion or fiefdom. Here, rather than the more common translation, lamp. The term forever, literally all the days, does not mean eternity or endless time, but rather a long period of time, a person's lifetime or the foreseeable future. On verse 20, Fritz comments, the notices on Edom can be considered historical. They could hardly be pure invention. Their origin is lost, but they possibly derive from the royal annals. Edom is originally the name attached to the small strip of arable land south of the Wadi El Hessa, and not the mountains made from Nubian sandstone. The name was then transferred to the inhabitants of this area, which probably descended from the nomad tribes mentioned in the Egyptian sources of the New Kingdom. There is evidence for settlements in this area as early as the 11th century. According to archaeological evaluation, however, quote, Edom remained a tribal fiefdom without urban institutions through the 9th and 8th centuries, end quote, according to E.A. Knauf. Even despite Judean sovereignty over Edom in Davidic times, we cannot assume a transition to a form of state organization much before the 9th century, end quote. On verse 21, Tza'il. The location of Tza'il is unknown. Some, like Fritz and Cogan, have suggested identifying it with Soar, attested in Genesis 13:10, 14:2 and 8, 19:22, 23, and 30, which lies at the southern end of the Dead Sea. Sweeney notes that some have suggested that the term is an alternative version of the name Seir, which refers to the heights east of the Arava that marked the boundary between Edom and Judah. Compare the Septuagint Seor and Vulgate Seira. Still others say that it is an unknown town in Moab, like Kimchi. You're muted, Isaac.
Oh, so why Moab and not Edom?
I don't know. Ask him.
It'd be like, oh, we're gonna fight the rebellion of Edom in Moab. Okay, seems a bit out of the way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me check real quick if that's. Oh, sorry, it's from Edom. I don't know why I said that this is from Moab. Maybe I fucked up. Or maybe it's a different version, though I can't... No, it's Edom. Sorry, I fucked up. Okay, so on verse 22, Libnah revolted at the same time. According to Joshua 21:13 and 1 Chronicles 6:57, Libnah was a Levite town at the Judean Shephelah, located near Lachish, Eglon, Hebron, and Debir. Its exact location is unclear. Sweeney writes that Libnah is identified with Tel Bonat to the south of Tel Es Safi and closer to the cities of the Shephelah, which it is associated in Joshua 15:42. McKenzie writes that the reference to Libnah is probably an addition, although its revolt may have occurred in conjunction with Edom's. The motive for the revolt was probably economic and, quote, linked with Edom's revolt as part of the trade network from the Mediterranean across the Negev to the Gulf of Aqaba and Arabia, end quote. On verse 25, in the 12th year of Joram, son of Achab, king of Israel. 929 reads, in the 11th year of Joram, son of Achab. Thus, Peshitta and the Lusanic Recension read 11th year in this verse. Cogan suggests that if this correction is not based on 929, then the Masoretic text could represent a manuscript which had Ashtei Esre, the Aramaic reading of 11, Achat Esre, which was corrupted due to copying. And finally, 28 and 29, Fritz comments, as already in 1 Kings 22, 1-38, the scene of battle is Ramoth Gilad, with no further details given. This settlement is to be found at Tel El Hussein in northern Gilead, where it constituted an important defense point against Aramean assaults due to its geographical position. Achab of Israel had already found his death here in battle against the Arameans. Jehoram too is wounded and leaves his army to recover at his winter residence at Jezreel, in Aramaic Seirin, I think, not Aramaic, I don't know. Excavations at Jezreel have uncovered strategically planned fortifications, but no traces of a royal palace. Achaziah's visit illustrates the good relations between Israel and Judah under the Onride dynasty, mirrored by the close family relations. Jehoram of Israel and Achaziah of Judah were cousins, since Jehoram's father Achab and Achaziah's mother Athaliah were both children of Omri and hence siblings. The visit of the king of Judah to Jezreel is most likely for family reasons. Yet it is an official act all the same, and the meeting of the two kings is an important prerequisite for the events to follow. Now, for the ancient Christians, I only have Ephraim. So first he says that Philistia, where the Shunammite woman moves, symbolizes the world that hates the saints and constantly persecutes them.
Is it
and-
us?
I don't know.
That sounds like us, yeah.
Oh,
But why-
nice.
Yeah, we're the Philistines because we don't think we're not very. We don't like this art, this Bible, the writing style.
Hmm. Yeah, if you're meaning
Um,
unrefined,
he just says it is a figure of the world. He writes that the world hates the saints and constantly persecutes them, and even after our Lord has defeated it and its prince, i.e. the devil, has been thrown out, these two never cease from fighting against its servants, grabbing and destroying the idle and the ignorant.
Well, according to
Yeah,
someone
they
in
always
the
find a
chat,
way to play victim.
According to someone in the chat, he didn't defeat Satan. Because Satan is still ruling this world, apparently.
Well, I mean, yeah, the thing. Okay, so I guess it depends on
Christianity.
the whole thing. This world of flesh is supposed to be ruled by Satan. So if you love this world, then you love Satan because you're supposed to love the next world. That's the thing.
I mean, Christianity is anything but consistent. So.
Well, hail Satan then.
Yeah.
Mm.
I don't know if the next world has jinn. I'm gonna need to see. I'm gonna need to at least see a decent flyer.
Yeah. There
Yeah.
is no next
Um,
world, and sadly, there is no spirit either.
Unfortunate. I have some spirit left.
Yeah. And he
2
also
bottles of rum right
sorry.
there.
Yeah, and he also writes that Ben-Hadad's illness derived from his unhappiness because he had been deeply afflicted by the fact that his armies had been defeated and his people had been driven out of the city.
From
Are
the
you
previous
telling me
story.
he died of hurt fifis?
I guess.
It was so embarrassing that they ran away because of an audio hallucination.
Ordeal.
What's the word?
Audio.
No, what's the right
hallucination.
word? Audio. That's it.
Auditory hallucination.
Auditory. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ordeal.
Ordeal. Okay. I think we should move on.
All right. So I don't know how many comments Lawrence is going to have on this. I normally like to have Lawrence not be the reader since he's going to be doing commentary at the same time, but I'll leave that up to him.
Yeah, I mean, for this, let's see, Isaiah, Jezebel. Oh yeah, Jezebel's death. That'll be fun. I'm not gonna have too much. Gonna have probably a few things. But...
Okay, so are you going to read it, or should we have Isaac or Lilith?
I can read it.
Okay.
Yeah. Read up to 23 first.
23. All right. Then the prophet Elisha called a member of the company of prophets and said to him, "Gird up your loins, take this flask of oil in your hand, and go to Ramoth Gilead. When you arrive, look there for Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi. Go in and get him to leave his companions and take him into an inner chamber. Then take the flask of oil, pour it on his head, and say, 'Thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel.' Then open the door and flee. Do not linger." So the young man, the prophet,
You can't expect to wield supreme executive power just because somebody spilled a drink on you.
He's just gonna anoint him king and yeet himself out.
It's like a drive-by baptism. Be like, "I baptize him. Run away."
So the young man, the young prophet, went to Ramoth Gilead. He arrived while the commanders of the army were in council, and he announced, "I have a message for you, commander." "For which one of us?" asked Jehu. "For you, commander." So Jehu got up and went inside. The young man poured the oil on his head, saying to him, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I anoint you king over the people of the Lord over Israel. You shall strike down the house of your master Ahab, so that I may avenge on Jezebel the blood of my servants the prophets and the blood of all the servants of the Lord. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish. I will cut off from Ahab every male, bond or free, in Israel. I will make
her against the wall.
Thank you. I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, son of Ahiah. The dogs shall eat Jezebel in the territory of Jezreel, and no one shall bury her." Then he opened the door and fled. When Jehu came back to his master's officers, they said to him, "Is everything all right? Why did that madman come to you?" He answered, "You know the sort and how they babble."
Yeah.
They said, "Liar, come on, tell us." So he said, "This is what he said to me. 'Thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel.'" Then hurriedly they all took their cloaks and spread them for him on the bare steps. And they blew the trumpet and proclaimed, "Jehu is king." Thus Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Joram, with all Israel, had been on guard at Ramoth Gilead against King Hazael of Aram. But King Joram had returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds that the Arameans had inflicted on him when he fought against King Hazael of Aram. So Jehu said, "If this is your wish, then let no one slip out of the city to go and tell the news in Jezreel." Then Jehu mounted his chariot and went to Jezreel, where Joram was lying ill. King Ahaziah of Judah had come down to visit Joram. In Jezreel, the sentinel standing on the tower spied the company of Jehu arriving and said, "I see a company." Joram said, "Take a horseman and send to meet him, and let him say, 'Is it peace?' So the horseman went to meet him, and he said, 'Thus says the king, is it peace?' Yehu responded, 'What have you to do with peace? Fall in behind me.' The sentinel reported, saying, the messenger reached them, but he is not coming back. Then he sent out a second horseman, who came to them and said, 'Thus says the king, is it peace?' Yehu answered, 'What have you to do with peace? Fall in behind me.' Again, the sentinel reported he reached them, but he is not coming back. It looks like the driving of Yehu, son of Nimshi, for he drives like a maniac." Yoram said, "Get ready." And they got his chariot ready. Then King Yoram of Israel and King Ahaziah of Judah set out, each in his chariot, and went to meet Yehu. They met him at the property of Naboth the Jezreelite. Wait, hold on. Is that the same as the vineyard guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's. I think there's supposed to be some symbolism there.
Yeah,
Who
yeah.
knows? Maybe they wrote the whole backstory to make it more dramatic.
I was just making sure it was the same guy. When Yoram saw Yehu, he said, "Is it peace, Yehu?" He answered, "What peace can there be so long as the many prostitutions and sorceries of your mother Jezebel continue?" Then Yoram reigned about and fled, saying to Ahaziah, "Treason, Ahaziah."
Mm-hmm.
So
Them's fighting words. You talk about my mama.
Oh yeah.
So
It's-
conspiracy to make him king. That's fun.
It's I've pointed this out several times, how there's this analogy between worship and marriage, and worshiping another god is called adultery. And that's really what Jezebel is supposedly guilty of, is worshiping other gods at a time when everyone worshiped other gods. But they keep calling it her prostitutions. And she becomes this sexualized caricature when literally all she ever does is marry a king and then try to stamp out a crazed cult infestation, which in fairness is like the role of many a video game. Dragon Age Inquisition, anyone?
Tomo plays
sorry,
a
Lo.
similar game, I think.
What?
Laura,
You
are
play a
judging?
similar game.
What game?
Well, you play a game where you like you have to like control kings and stuff. No.
I guess Crusader Kings 3, but I'm not really playing that. Like I used to,
No.
but not really because
you used to.
it's difficult.
Either way, plot to make Yehu king. And Yoram is in a bit of a... He's got a problem here, because everyone that is being sent to Yehu is just following him. So he's just sending people to him. And I mean, Yoram is sick anyways. So and he's still going out to battle, right? Yeah, he's still going out to battle. So you know
Well,
what? Good for him.
I don't know if he was expecting there to be a fight because he went by himself. It's like two kings and their chariots.
Well, he went. Well, I mean, him and Ahaziah. But if he was, yeah, I guess he did. It doesn't say that he like took.
He doesn't know. I guess maybe he still thought it was just bad news from the front or something.
Well, if they recognized the chariot driving as one of his commanders, then he wouldn't think it was.
Yeah.
You know, like you don't expect your general to just march up and stab you. Usually, you know, they.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we haven't even seen the fight yet, so.
Yeah, we
you're
haven't.
right.
Okay, so I start on verse 1. A man from the company of the prophets. I just have this. Traditionals based on Seder Olam Rabbah 18 wrote that this was Jonah, son of Amittai. Yeah. On verse 2, Yehu, son of Yehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi. He is elsewhere called the son of Nimshi in verse 20, 1 Kings 19:16, and 2 Chronicles 22:7. Cogan suggested that Nimshi was Yehu's grandfather, and he is mentioned because he was of high status and was more known than Jehoshaphat. Hens-Piazza suggested that Nimshi was a clan name and is included here to clarify that Yehu was not the son of Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah. Vaticanus has the son of Jehoshaphat, Yehu, son of Nimshi. Lucanic Recension has Yehu, son of Nimshi, son of Jehoshaphat. Halot notes the Arabic cognate nims, meaning ikneumon, marten, or weasel. And Cogan comments, quote, Yehu is mentioned in the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III in the form Iowa. The name Yehu was interpreted as the shortening of the call Yohu, he is Yahweh. The Tetragrammaton is transcribed in Assyrian as Iya. In Assyrian inscriptions, Yehu is known as Yawa Mahumri or Humri, Yehu son of Omri. The indication son of X does not indicate the father's name, but to the dynasty's originator. There is no doubt regarding the Assyrian authors knowing that Yehu occupied the rule in Samaria and overthrew the house of Omri. But following their custom, they chose to call Israel by the first Israelite king who managed to establish a dynasty. The use of this name for the kingdom of Israel is known from the 8th century BCE until the days of Tiglath-Pileser III and Sargon II.
That is actually really interesting. It's nice to know that Judah has an actual historical origin beyond the mythical Sons of Abraham vibe.
Oh, sorry. I should point out one thing. So remember in what what Elijah tells this young prophet to tell Jehu, right? He just tells him that he's king and to anoint him and then go away, right? But instead, he tells him all that, but also says like, oh yeah, also strike down the house, and Jezebel is awful and all that stuff. So because of, and then it goes like at the very end of verse 10, then he opened the door and fled. That should be where it ends. Sorry. So because of that, I smoked too much. It's been argued that that those verses of like after from verse 7, from verse 7 through the first half of verse 10, that has been argued to be not original. The Yahoo story would not include this thing, but it was added in order to justify the coup, essentially.
I mean, McKenzie takes it as all from one source. I mean, a prophetic narrator at least.
I'm interested in this water ritual to become king. I mean, one guy becomes king because he gets water poured on his head, and another guy makes himself king by putting water on somebody else's head, on somebody who's already the king.
It's magic.
Oil.
It's magic anointing oil. That's very important for
All right, so this
magic.
is so the source for this is, well, the book that I have is Israel Constructs Its History, but the argument came from Minokami in Die Revolution, I can't fucking speak, of the Revolution of Yahoo, is how that's German. So that is the paper, it looks like. Yeah.
I love our chat. Stop feeding the trolls, guys. And also, I apologize for using a movie reference instead of the book quote.
Okay, so on verse 4, the young prophet. In Hebrew, it's Hana'ar Hanavi. Literally, the boy, the prophet. The meaning is difficult. Traditionals followed Targum, the young man, the student of the prophet, with Kimchi explaining that at first it said the young man, and then specifies which young man, the young man, the prophet. Septuagint reads, the lad, the prophet. Vulgate reads, the young man, the servant of the prophet, and Peshitta, the young prophet. McKenzie writes that the different positions suggest that Hana'ar is expansive, perhaps added to avoid confusion between the prophet and Elisha. Sweeney writes that because both terms, Na'ar and Navi, include the definite article, Hanavi functions as an adjective for Hana'ar, i.e. the prophetic boy, or in more idiomatic English, the young prophet. Thus, quote, the phrase serves as an appositional specification for the initial occurrence of Hana'ar, end quote. On verse 6, Fritz comments, the anointing takes place with no witnesses present. As we do not know what building is involved, we also cannot speculate about the nature of the room where the act takes place. The anointing was an indispensable part of the crowning ritual in 2 Samuel 2:4, 5:3, 1 Kings 1:34 and 39. As in the case of Saul and David, the anointing takes place secretly in order to designate a new successor to the kingship, as we see in 1 Samuel 10:1 and 16:13. The anointing was the external sign to have been chosen by God. The disciple takes to his heels once the deed is done and remains unrecognized and anonymous, a fact that stresses that the executing figure is little more than a tool to transmit God's will, end quote. On verses 7 through 9, Sweeney comments, the terms of this commission rehearse the causes for Ahab's condemnation from the earlier Elijah narratives, to avenge the lives of Yahweh's prophets and servants murdered by Ahab's wife, Jezebel, in 1 Kings 18 and 19. The servants' words also tie the commission to earlier acts to exterminate the dynasties of Jeroboam ben Nebat and Baasha, insofar as it refers specifically in verse 8 to the extermination of all who, quote, piss against the wall, bond and free in Israel, end quote. Compare 1 Kings 14:10, 16:1, also 1 Kings 21:21, which employs this phrase in relation to Elijah's condemnation of Ahab.
Look, guys, I get that being able to pee standing up is probably quite convenient. It's one of the few things about that mechanism that I do slightly envy. But is it really the most defining characteristic of a man?
One of.
Well, it's not just men, it's like, all the male descendants, I guess it's trying to be derogatory, I guess, as well. So it's like,
Yeah.
I would say there is something about, I think originally, like Yehu was mentioned earlier when it comes, but back when we were talking about Elijah. So Elijah really was supposed to do this, and then he kind of, I guess, gave the job to Elisha, and now Elisha gave his job to someone else. But then the guy says, it's almost like what he's saying sounds like he's supposed to be quoting Elijah, maybe? Does that make sense? Like, as you
it's hypothetically possible that he was given a more complete message, but it does seem strange given how often the Bible likes to just frickin' repeat itself.
Yeah, like, what does it say? I will avenge on Jezebel the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of the other servants of God. So, he's quoting someone. It's not the young prophet or who is saying my servants, the prophets, were killed by Jezebel, because that was a long time ago. So he must be either he's quoting Elijah, or maybe there is a version of the story where this is all Elijah's doing, and this happened earlier.
I suppose. I mean, the prophecy about avenging the family for the deaths of the prophets is definitely mentioned before. I suppose it's supposed to be carrying on that same, like, this is the culmination of that older prophecy.
Okay, on verse 10, Hens-Piazza comments, The portended death of Jezebel, which concludes the prophet's speech, is predicted in graphic terms. Death appears to be an insufficient punishment for Israel's Phoenician queen. After all, Jezebel was consistently held responsible for the increased popularity of the Baals in Israel. Hence, she will be denied burial and insulted further when dogs consume what is left of her body. Whether or not her condemnation is legitimate, it remains consistent across the narrative. Still, we must at least entertain the possibility that Jezebel served as a narrative scapegoat, an outsider blamed for her family's sins and a nation's misfortune. Otherwise, how is it that despite the prophet's intolerance for Omride kings, she, rather than they, receive one of the most damning of punishments?
Yeah, I was curious about that too. What did she do?
Basically, she did order Naboth's death, and they also say that she was filled with sorcery and prostitution. So
Yeah,
I get
filled
but
with
it's-
sorcery and prostitution. Filled with.
I am always, every day, I'm filled with prostitution.
Uh-huh.
It's
Yeah.
a wonderful life indeed.
Yes.
Mhm.
Oh, I didn't know you.
It's a living.
I wonder if
you
the
know.
whole thing that because there's so many conservatives that have this huge issue with prostitution. I wonder if their real frustration is
It's-
just pure jealousy.
It's not
Yeah.
just conservatives. Like I know, at least in Israel, many liberals who have a problem with prostitution. You know?
Well, there's a different. It's a completely different argument. But there's, liberals will normally talk about like the safety of women and stuff like that.
Yeah.
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 Safe, legal prostitution amongst consenting adults is not always what happens in real life. It's fine, but when it's like that, when it's like escorts, but there's real life tends to be a bit messier.
I think it's funny that here in the United States, for example, prostitution is illegal unless you turn a camera on.
That's true.
Yeah.
You never have to get arrested for prostitution. Just set up a camera in the corner and say you were making porn. You don't even have to turn it on.
Yep.
Okay, on verse 10, this maniac, in Hebrew, Hameshuga. Septuagint has the epileptic. Well, no, I maybe it is a reference to craziness. I guess.
It's interesting how they're a bit self-aware that prophets come across as crazy men.
Well, because it's not just how they come across, right? That part of being a prophet was getting into those kind of ecstatic states. So like you would kind of be it's not like I don't know how to put this. It's just a thing that you do sometimes.
They do though, that getting off into the ecstasy and rambling and letting the spirit move you.
But people still always go to them in these stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but that's an accepted spiritual practice and behavior for prophets. It still is. Go to frickin' Pentecostal churches. You'll see exactly the same shit. Someone will get all wound up and start prophesying and calling things into existence. And some of them actually think that if they say a thing, it will influence that thing to happen, so long as they believe and do not doubt.
Yeah, that reminds me of somebody in the chat right now. Repent and ye will be saved. Who ever believed that? When did that ever work? How is that not just always interpreted as just a stupid, crazy person being dumb?
Well, you take children before the age of reason, when they're very vulnerable and dependent on their caretakers, and you groom them to believe these ideas and to be triggered into a state of anxiety and fear whenever certain keywords are brought up, and thus they're prevented from engaging rational thought on the matter. You sort of
We're
set up.
talking about the chat now. We're talking about somebody that just posted one of those repent things.
Oh,
in
yeah.
this chat.
That could be that, or it could be the whole thing where I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God to everyone who believes, yada yada. So you have to show that you're not ashamed of Jesus by acting like a complete jackass and violating all social mores and just being idiotic. But then that proves, you see, that your faith is sincere and that you are a
Okay.
true believer.
Mm.
Your faith is sincere, just as long as you don't have to back up what you say, or correct what you've been you correct what you said when it's been pointed out.
Well, it does help shame people into the sunk cost fallacy and prevents them from engaging critical thinking. So keeps many a slave in mind-forged manacles.
Yep. All right. So where are
There's
we
another comment.
otherwise?
I'm-
Were you
I'm-
done with your?
But there's
I'm
another
not-
comment.
have yeah, there is another comment. I thought maybe Aaron should read it.
Okay. M. Doug says, "Is it likely that Jezebel is a metaphysical character?"
Metaphysical. What
I
does
think
that
she
mean?
became a
Metaphysical. Do you mean metaphorical?
Yeah.
Oh.
What do you mean
Yes,
metaphysical?
that's what they mean.
I
I mean, she
I don't.
became she became a demon later on, right? Like in
Yeah.
I think the name Jezebel is used for a
Well, that's an
demon
option. I
in,
didn't
like-
know.
Well, I mean,
I
like
don't remember
later
Jezebel
traditions
specifically.
decided that there was a demon with that name. I think.
I don't know about a demon Jezebel,
Yeah.
but it definitely is a negative association that has like I could see a Southern granny being like, "You have a demon of the Jezebel on you,"
Yeah.
but not like an actual
Oh,
demonology.
okay, maybe.
You know,
Mm.
like Lilith and Azrael and Samael. Okay, those are angels, but 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Yeah, it's hard. It's
Okay.
even if you mean I'm not sure what you mean by metaphysical, but if you meant metaphorical, then it's hard to say because these histories were written. Metaphorical. Okay. So these when these histories were written, it was at a time when like history and myth were just like blended together. So they thought it was real, but it was more of like the meaning behind it, but you can't really call it metaphorical because they did think it was real at the same time. So like it's hard to you can't really put it in a modern box is what I'm saying.
Okay, so I'll start again with a comment on verse 11. This maniac, in Hebrew Hameshuga, and Septuagint has the epileptic. Kimchi notes that the prophet is sometimes called madman because, quote, sometimes during prophecy their behavior was that of a madman who lost his mind. As it is said, then he too stripped off his clothes in 1 Samuel 19:24, for they lack emotion and mental forces. End quote. Yeah. Gelsonides wrote, quote, they called the prophet madman because due to the isolation of their mind in the Holy One, blessed is he, they were foolish in other matters, end quote. And McKenzie comments, quote, prophets are called mad elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, in Hosea 9:7 and Jeremiah 29:26. And behind this designation may lie the idea that the insane or mentally unstable were seen in antiquity as divinely touched, quote-unquote, and therefore sacrosanct, in 1 Samuel 21:12-15. But there is also something contemptuous and dismissive in the soldier's reference to the prophet as crazy. This may reflect how those in the military generally view prophets. Still, the designation again implies that they recognized him as a member of the prophetic guild, and they take his message seriously by making Yehu king.
It's interesting, too. There's a bit of that the hero never wants to be king and thus must always demur at least once, if not 3 times, to it. Because he's reluctant to tell them. I don't know if it's because he isn't sure how they'll take it or... Because, I mean, a prophet is a prophet, but if you said, we're supposed to go overthrow the king that we're literally on a mission for right now, that's a pretty big step.
I guess. On verse 13, Hens-Piazza comments, on the occasion of this third citation of the oracle, the officers respond, Hurriedly, they conduct a private ceremony acknowledging Yehu's kingship. With gestures reminiscent of Solomon's coronation in 1 Kings 139, they make a royal carpet with their cloaks, sound the trumpet, and declare Yehu is king. Their instant reception of the news suggests that they were hoping for someone, perhaps Yehu himself, to seize this opportune moment and exert the authority to overthrow the ailing Yoram. After all, though Yoram was home safely recuperating in his Jezreel residence, his army was still embattled at Ramoth Gilead. Now the council has it on God's own word. Yehu will replace Yoram. Although the assembly initially mocked the messenger of this news, now they wholeheartedly accept the message. Their instant acclamation of Yehu's kingship indicates that the seeds of revolt were likely sown long before these events. End quote.
I'm seeing a bunch of discussion in the chat about prostitution. We should have a discussion like that. I should make a video just to have that topic addressed. And I would like to include some actual sex workers if they're able to be on. You don't have to have cameras on or whatever. I do a lot of things like that where people don't show who they are. But if you're interested, send me a message about it. Go ahead, Tomer.
Okay, so on that same verse, the bare steps. In Hebrew, it's Gerem HaMa'alot. Septuagint reads Garem of the steps, because original, right? Targum reads the smooth step. Rashi explains that these were steps made corresponding to the hours of the day, i.e. the steps were a type of sundial, each step representing 1 hour of the day. Kimchi takes it to be the top step of the steps. McKenzie notes that gerem, bone or self, is evidently synonymous with etzem, bone, and refers to the substance of the stairs. He also notes that Gray mentions 2 other possible solutions. 1. Gerem is a rare architectural term cognate to Arabic jarama, cut off, that referred to a landing at the top of the staircase leading into the building from which Yehu emerged. And 2. Read marom, height or elevation, for gerem, thus yielding the top of the stairs. Vulgate reads a judgment seat, and Peshita a seat in the steps. Josephus in Antiquities 9:111 does not mention the bare steps. On verses 14 and 15, McKenzie notes that verses 14 and 15a, from "And King Yoram sat" to "Hazael, king of Aram," are intrusive. Quote, they separate Yehu's response to his peers in verse 15b from their proclamation of him as king. End quote. He suggested that the intrusion originated as a marginal gloss or variant to verse 16, perhaps motivated by the desire for a conspiracy notice ahead of the story in verses 17 through 37. Likewise, Cogan notes that in a few Hebrew manuscripts, there is a space before and after these verses, which suggests that the author inserted it to prepare the reader for what's about to come.
Oh, that does make sense. It's interesting. It's interesting in the places where you can see the stitching in the compilation of different stories and the inserting of one story into another and the sort of, transitions to try and weave it out. You can't always see the stitching clearly. Sometimes it's so clear I can even see it in an English translation without assistance, but sometimes it's well hidden, and then there's always all those gradients in between.
On verse 17, Yehu's troops. In Hebrew, it's Shif'at Yehu. The word Shif'at, derived from Shif'ah, appears in Ezekiel 26:10, Isaiah 66, and Job 22:11 and 38:34. Most other translations render troops or company, a reading accepted by Rashi, Kara, and modern commentators. Kimchi, Gersonides, and Abravanel render a multitude of people. Likewise, Halot renders the crowds with Yehu. Septuagint reads the cloud of dust of Yehu, which McKenzie takes to be a double reading, and Josephus in Antiquities 9:114, a band of horsemen. On verse 20, the driving is like that of Yehu, son of Nimshi. He drives like a maniac. Hens-Piazza notes that the description maniac, in Hebrew shigaon, draws upon the same Hebrew word that was used to characterize the young prophet who delivered the oracle of Yehu's appointment. McKenzie notes Shanda's opinion that the preoccupation with his driving style suggests that Yehu was the commander of Israel's chariotry. A different tradition, attested in Josephus in Antiquities 9:117 and Targum, claims that Yehu was driving slowly. The reason for this discrepancy is unclear. Dre explains that the Targumists did not consider this type of behavior appropriate for a king who was carrying out God's will.
That's a strange thing. As if
Maybe
rushing
he's got
into
the-
battle.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it just seems strange that rushing to commit to the word of the Lord is not seen as kingly. But sorry, you were saying.
Maybe there's a hint of the Holy Spirit, or like a spirit from God, right? Like, because if the prophets get it, surely, like, and this anointing might also kind of help with that.
Get him into kind of a frantic state, like Saul when he prophesied and stripped down and
But
sang.
it's supposed to be like a familiar trait of his that this guy is on the lookout and he sees him like
drives crazy.
It must be him because of the way he drives. So
yeah, fair enough. Okay, so I guess he's just a bad driver. Okay, got it. He must be from Chicago.
Oh no, he would have made it onto Canada's Worst Driver. That was an awesome show. Ran for well over a decade. Good tips too.
I mean, drive by bow and arrow shooting. Probably not the safest. You could put someone's eye out with that.
And finally, 22, the idolatry and witchcraft of your mother Jezebel. Hebrew Bible reads, the whoredoms, znunei, of Jezebel your mother, and her many sorceries. Fritz writes that this addition, quote, characterizes the cult of Baal associated with Jezebel in no uncertain terms as whoredom, in accordance with the judgment of Hosea in 1:2, 2:4, 4:11, and 6:10, end quote.
That's another word I enjoy. Whoredoms, plural.
Yeah. So
and
she's more like
Hosea.
Shut up. Especially
she's
given
more like a
Hosea
madam.
marrying a prostitute. Shame on you, Isaac.
What?
He did marry a prostitute.
He did. Though Isaac made a pun, though he should be ashamed.
Yeah.
Well, if the president can do it,
Oh,
anybody
yeah.
can.
Hosea is pretty good though.
We'll get to that. McKenzie notes that harlotries, the root zayin nun hey, is commonly used in the Hebrew Bible for the worship of other gods, as we see in Exodus 34:16, Leviticus 17:7, Deuteronomy 31:16, etc. And sorcery, in the root kaf shin pei, can be a catch-all for non-Yahwistic practices, as we see in Isaiah 47:9 and 12, Micah 5:11-13, and Nahum 3:4. Thus, both terms
it's not
represent...
magic when we do it. It's like
Always.
It's literally it's magic because they're doing the same thing, but it's not in the name of Yahweh.
Yeah. Thus, both terms represent Jezebel as, quote, foreign, idolatrous, and leading Israel astray, end quote. He writes that this is an expansion by P.N., who blames Jezebel for the apostasy of the Achabites, as well as the persecution of Yahweh's servants in verse 7.
No wonder there's so many patriarchal incels in Christianity. If you do what I do, you're a whore.
Hua.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. If you do the same thing that I want to do, yeah.
Yeah. But not with me. If you do what I want or what I do with somebody other than me, you're a whore.
Yeah, that's it for this part.
All right, so are we going to move on?
Yeah.
Well, we still have the rest of the chapter.
Yeah. It's almost as if Aaron doesn't follow.
No, he doesn't. All right. So from verse 24 then.
It's a very busy show today.
Yeah, and
I
there are
guess.
distractions, at least
All
on
right,
one
so
side.
verse
Very
24.
busy chat too.
Good.
That's what I
Good.
meant.
Keep that engagement up. Yehu drew his bow with all his strength and shot Joram between the shoulders so that the arrow pierced his heart and he sank in his chariot. Yehu said to his aide Bidkar, lift him out and throw him on the plot of ground belonging to Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember when you and I rode side by side behind his father Ahab, how the Lord uttered this oracle against him. For the blood of Naboth and for the blood of his children that I saw yesterday, says the Lord, I swear I will repay you on this very plot of ground. Now, therefore, lift him out and throw him on the plot of ground in accordance with the word of the Lord.
Throw him to the floor.
When King Ahaziah of Judah saw this, he fled in the direction of Beth Hagan. Yehu pursued him, saying, shoot him also. And they shot him in the chariot at the ascent to Gur, which is by Iblim. Then he fled to Megiddo and died there. His officers carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in his tomb with his ancestors in the city of David. In the 11th year of Joram, son of Ahab, Ahaziah began to reign over Judah. When Yehu came to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it. She painted her eyes and adorned her head and looked out of the window. As Yehu entered the gate, she said, is it peace, Zimri, murderer of your master? He looked up to the window and said, who is on my side? Who? 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him. He said, throw her down. So they threw her down. Some of her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses, which trampled on her. Then he went in and ate and drank. He said, see to that cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter. But when they went to bury her, they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands.
The
When
skull.
they came,
The skull.
yeah,
Because that was already somehow cleaned.
Well, the dogs
Yeah,
ate
they must have
everything
eaten it,
except
yeah.
her hands and feet and head.
When they came
And what
back
did she
and
do?
told him,
She asked a question.
Well,
but
she
they didn't like
tried
her
to-
beforehand.
Yeah, she also tried to eliminate a violent cult that kept killing her prophets, and she made decisions and apparently had influence with her son. So obviously, she had to die.
Well, that's what you get for making decisions.
And I think the word like Gulgolet can refer to the skull like the bone, but it could also I think be used as like just a word for the head. I think.
Either way,
Cranium,
they
you
must
know.
have eaten the rest of her body or just trampled it into nothing.
Yeah, it's a bit weird.
the-
Normally, you would eat the hands and feet first, no?
I don't know.
Judging
How
do
by
you
the
know that?
places that animals lick
I'm talking
when they're
about
trying to
dogs,
wake you
like-
up. I don't know what Bolton. It's like that she was eaten
yeah.
faster than Bolton was in Game of Thrones.
I don't get that reference. But well, yeah, when they went to bury her, they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. Then, when they came back and told him, he said, this is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite. In the territory of Jezreel, the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel. The corpse of Jezebel shall be like dung on the field in the territory of Jezreel, so that no one can say, this is Jezebel. Yeah, so not identifiable.
It's going to be kind of like Tyre, where there's nothing you can even find of it.
Yeah.
So that is
Don't tell them about Google
end
Maps.
of chapter 9. So he kills both of the other kings, and it's interesting that we get the inclusion of when Ahaziah began to rule. at when. Oh, sorry. Yeah, when Uzziah began to rule, after he died, and usually gives us a little bit more than that too, like how many years the reign was. Although the where was it here? Yeah, the quotation in verse 26. The quotation, and that's the one where he says like he's going to make up for all that stuff on the same plot of land. The quotation given here is not found earlier. Throwing Yoram's body on Naboth's land represents a conflation of Elijah's prophecy against Ahab and the prophecy against his dynasty. That's from the same chapter, 1 Kings 21.
Yeah, that little that parenthesis of the he became king in the 11th year, blah blah blah. It actually doesn't. It contradicts what it said earlier because it was the 12th year, and Arashi has like quite a big paragraph about all of these weird dates and how it kind of makes sense, but doesn't.
Oh yeah, it takes into account the fact that Yoram and Hazael died in the same year. So yeah, it corrects the chronology.
Yeah. You wanted to say something, Eliza, before that, or?
No, I just said like Rashi has like a whole long chapter, and I read it, but it wasn't that interesting.
Yeah, I should know McKenzie, who writes that verses 25 and 26a are DH's addition to the story of Yehu's revolt based on an older version of the Naboth story before it was replaced by 1 Kings 21, 1-16. The dumping of Yoram's corpse is retribution for the murders of Naboth and his sons and fulfills DH's anti-dynastic oracle's prediction of non-burial. And PN added verse 26b, signaled as an addition by the Atah, further emphasizing Yehu's actions as the fulfillment of Yahweh's word.
Yeah, I think the only interesting thing in there was something about how there is somewhere where it says he became king in the 42nd year, which is impossible. Or he was 42 years old when he became king, which is impossible because his father was only 40 when he died. So how could he become... No, I don't know what it was. Might be confused. But yeah, something like that.
That would be interesting. Yeah. I got pregnant by someone who won't be born for 2 years yet. Really?
Yeah, in Chronicles, it says he was 42 years old when he reigned, instead of saying that he was 22 or something like that. I don't know.
Okay, so I'll start on verse 24. Sweeney comments, Yehu's killing of Yehoram emphasizes a combination of dramatic and propagandistic elements. On the one hand, it emphasizes Yehu's rapid action and sure aim in dispatching Yehoram with a powerful arrow shot that strikes its victim right between the shoulder blades, penetrates the body through the heart, and kills Yehoram instantly. On the other hand, it points to the justification for the assassination by referring once again to Elijah's oracle condemning the house of Ahab.
Who's that little cutie?
That's food.
This is chibi.
Chibi.
Yeah, when my wife had a snake that would only eat live, and she had this one as a baby, and she was going to feed the snake, and she said, "No, this is just too cute. I can't do this." So, 2 years now.
Chibi, you were saved by your cuteness.
Yeah, I have a friend who does have a snake, and when she started feeding them, when she started feeding the snake live, she just could not. So she ended up with like a shit ton of mice. It's like the snake has to eat. Like,
yeah, it is a moral dilemma.
Yeah, I get it, but like the snake needs to eat.
Yeah, I have a similar situation, which I could, if I wanted to, I could have a king cobra. King cobras are the most intelligent of all snakes. The problem is that what king cobras eat are other snakes. They eat reticulated pythons most often. And I love retics. There's just no way I could do that. And then here I am holding this. Anyway, so Feeding pets can make you feel like a complete hypocrite.
Chicken nuggies. Just chicken nuggies for everybody.
Yeah. Okay, on verse 25, Bidkar. The exact origin of the name Bidkar is unclear. Peshitta renders Bar Dekar, which led Noth to take the name as a shortening of Ben Dekar, found in 1 Kings 4:9. Septuagint has Badekar, and Josephus in Antiquities 9:119 has Badak. Sweeney writes that the reference to Bidkar is important here because it establishes him together with Yehu as a witness to Elijah's oracle against Achab concerning the murder of Naboth the Jezreelite. He writes, quote, 1 Kings 21 makes no mention of Yehu's or Bidkar's presence, but the present reference assures the reader that Yehu is not a self-appointed aspirant to the power, but a man who acts with divine legitimacy, end quote.
Yeah, I think Yehu was just blaming his bad driving on his bad car. But yeah.
Shut up, Isaac. Shut up, okay?
You're a dirty,
Yeah.
crooked jockey and you drive a crooked horse.
That's really good, Isaac. That's really good. I like that.
I mean, it's your fault, Tomo. You were the one who mentioned bad car.
My fault?
rather.
That's good.
Yeah, because
Excuse
we
me,
were-
you with all the blames? Have we not discussed it in counseling, Isaac? You
Have we not discussed it in counseling?
They have
How
couples
close are you two?
counseling.
Very.
I mean,
we still
I
trying
mean, we
to
would have
maintain
just.
it though.
They're working
I
through
mean,
it.
we would have just read it as Bidkar, but then you had to go in and say all of the other ways it could be pronounced. So I was able to think about it. It's your fault.
I guess.
Oh, just kiss already.
Blaming it on his bad car.
He
I'm
said
going to
he
use
didn't.
that joke. That's good. That's gold.
Okay, on verse 26, Fritz comments, this little afterthought adds another justification for the death of Jehoram of Israel by referring to the figure of Naboth, whose innocent blood was shed by Achab. The extinction of the house of Omri is interpreted in terms of expiation for innocently shed blood. Since blood is the carrier of life, innocent bloodshed forfeits the life of the perpetrator, his own and that of his descendants. Blood guilt can be expiated even without human intervention. The murder of Jehoram is legitimated in retrospect by the injustice that Achab did to Naboth. The deed then appears to fulfill Elisha's words to Achab in 1 Kings 21:19.
It all just very much rings of writing a horrible villain backstory for the person you killed so that you can still look like the good guy.
Mm-hmm.
Which, in fairness, is probably a lot of court propaganda. We forget that nobility all started out as bandits
I guess.
and brigands and just violent.
Hmm.
They were most successful.
Mm-hmm. Okay, on verse 27, Sweeney comments, having disposed of Jehoram, the fifth episode now turns to Yehu's killing of Achaziah ben Jehoram of Judah. This is not gratuitous killing, since Achaziah is the son of Jehoram ben Yehoshaphat and Athaliah, identified both as the daughter of Omri in 2 Kings 8:26 and as the daughter of Achab in 2 Kings 8:18, also 11:1. It thereby fulfills Elijah's oracle concerning the destruction of the house of Omri. The Judean king initially flees toward Beth Hagan, identified with a tel in the center of the modern city of Jenin. The site is located at the southwest of Jezreel at the entrance to the Dothan Valley that leads to Samaria. Yehu orders that Achaziah be intercepted at Ma'ale Gur, the ascent of Gur, by Yibleam. Yibleam is identified with Khirbet Bel-Ameh, located just over a mile south of Beth Hagan or Jenin, where it too guards the western side of the pass into the Dothan Valley. The ascent of Gur refers to a rise in the road into the valley located by a site named Gur. Khirbet and Najjar is located nearby on the east slope of the Wadi Belame. Achaziah's movement suggests that Yehu succeeded in cutting him off from the Dothan Valley and access to Samaria by way of Ma'ale Gur. His turn to Megiddo indicates a bid to seek sanctuary at the strongly fortified city, which guards the strategic western pass between the Jezreel Valley and the coastal plain. End quote.
Don't you hate it when you're visiting your ally and then they get assassinated by one of the generals and then you're like, this is fucked up. I don't want to be in the middle of this. And then they kill you too.
I hate when that happens.
Such a bummer.
On verse 29, according to 825, Ahaziah ruled Judah in the 12th year of Yoram. Rashi suggested that Yoram ruled for 1 year during his father's lifetime because he was afflicted with severe maladies, as we see in 2 Chronicles 21, 18 and 19, and 22:1. Cogan writes that since the two kings were murdered in the same year, during the 12th year of Yoram, we get that Ahaziah, who ruled for just a year in 826, became king in the 11th year of Yoram. Sweeney writes that while this notice appears to be out of place, it functions as a retrospective notice concerning the now dead king, suggesting that the verse is a vestige from an earlier form of this narrative that was later incorporated into DH. Likewise, Fritz takes this comment to be a redactional addition that repeats the synchronism of the introductory formula in 825. On verse 30, Sweeney notes that, quote, many male scholars fantasize that Jezebel puts eyeliner on her eyes and fixes her hair because she intends to seduce Yehu, end quote. Thus, Rashi comments, quote, she made up her hair in order to have charm in Yehu's eyes and he would marry her, end quote.
Right, because she couldn't just put on her makeup and dress nicely because she's going to die with some dignity.
And Ephraim wrote, she thought that maybe Yehu would be seduced by her look and would take her among his wives. McKenzie notes that some biblical texts associated use of makeup with seduction and sexual looseness, as we see in Jeremiah 4:30 and Ezekiel 23:40-45. And that there are, quote, inescapable sexual overtones, end quote, in this passage. Though Sweeney notes that royal women would prepare themselves properly for public appearances. Gersonidi suggested that she did this to still hold on to the kingdom. Likewise, Cogan writes that Jezebel, quote, walked to her fate with all her royal insignia as is appropriate for her high status, end quote. Hens-Piazza writes that Jezebel, quote, appears self-reliant and proud, not in sackcloth and ashes, but royally adorned and dressed. She readies herself for what lies ahead, end quote. Fritz writes that Jezebel's appearance in the window does not indicate an obscure cultic aspect. Rather, quote, the window was the only point of contact for a woman in the male-dominated public space, as we see in Judges 5:28, 2 Samuel 6:16, and Song 2:9, end quote. On verse 31, have you come in peace, you Zimri, you murderer of your master? Like Yehu, Zimri killed his master Elah in 1 Kings 16 verses 10-15, but remained on the throne for 7 days, since the people made Omri their king. And he conspired against Zimri, which led to his death in 1 Kings 16:16-20. Fritz writes that Jezebel puts Yehu in line with other murderers of kings, and reminds him of their untimely deaths. McKenzie notes Simon B. Parker's opinion that she was attempting to flirt with Yehu, since the name or word Zimri can mean strong one or hero. This, however, is refuted by Olian, who suggested that Zimri's name puns on an alternative root Zain Mem Resh, prune a vineyard, and thus recalling the Naboth's vineyard in 1 Kings 21, and the depiction of Zimri as the pruner of the Amrite vineyard. Josephus in Antiquities 9:1-2 reads, a fine slave who has killed his master.
Yeah, there are certain kinds of men who you can't put on makeup without them thinking that you want to seduce them. You can't appear without them thinking that you're doing it for them. And it just reeks of that. It's such a gross attitude to take to a woman who, frankly, knew exactly what was going on and went to face her fate with dignity without cowering and groveling and throwing on sackcloth and ashes and making a spectacle of herself. It's vulgar. and it's vile. And Jezebel deserves more dignity.
And regardless of if you think that she was, right or wrong, she doesn't want to come across as apologetic, right?
No.
I know what I did. You don't like me, but I'm not gonna come out here with my hair down and not dressed up because I want pity.
No.
I'm not. Yeah.
I should note Hens-Piazza's comment. She writes, though the story leaves little left with which to reinstate Jezebel's humanity, we, the readers, can still make a difference in her memory. How we read and understand this text further perpetrates or resists the violence encoded there. The Bible convulses with the names of victims, some less obvious and less innocent than others. The case of Jezebel is an instance of the ease with which outsiders may be vilified. How we read and remember her not only occasions the opportunity to rehearse her misdeeds, but to be mindful of the violence done to her.
Who's that from?
Hens-Piazza.
Oh.
Okay, on verse 34, Josephus in Antiquities 9:1-3 wrote that Jehu refreshed himself from the journey. Hens-Piazza wrote that Jehu's feast emphasizes the utter disregard for Jezebel's death. Sweeney writes that by entering the building to have lunch, this establishes his authority with those inside. Likewise, McKenzie writes that the meal may have had political significance as an occasion to garner support from the local nobles and officials in exchange for pledges of protection, beneficence, and the like. On verse 35, Rashi, based on Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer 17, wrote that she would dance before bridegrooms with her hands and feet and shake her head.
Ugh.
I guess.
Why do men always... Okay, guys, genuine question.
It's supposed to be a good thing. He's supposed to be saying that this is why those bits weren't eaten. Because she used her hands and feet for
I didn't pay to see you shake your head.
She used her hands and feet to...
Genuine question.
To bring joy to the bride and groom. Yeah.
I know you're not this kind of man, but you must have encountered them. Why do men have such creepy sexualized fantasies that they project onto all the women they hate?
I can't speak to that.
I've observed it too much to pretend that's not what it is. But
but I've never. What threw me was the last word when you said onto women they hate. I've never fantasized about anyone I didn't like.
I think that they're coming from here is this hated woman, she's prophesied to be eaten up, and stuff like that. But then they're like, well, in the end, the hands and feet and the skull was left. There must be a reason, and then the reason that they think up is something like, it's a bit trivial, she danced for the bride and groom, or she lamented the dead.
Performed some Mishnah good deed with these limbs.
Yeah.
And thus they were preserved.
Yeah, M-Doug throws in a comment, says, I get the feeling these kings were just a bunch of small-town gangsters like in medieval Europe.
Yep. Or like the shoguns before Japan. Aristocracy really.
We don't have to go back to ancient times. Russia in the 1990s.
Yeah, oligarchs. Same.
Yeah, I was gonna say the shoguns aren't that recent, aren't that long ago.
Wow.
There were shoguns. There were shoguns with rifles, and I'm trying to remember if there was something I think that there were trains in Europe.
Come to Texas, go to a Walmart. They'll show guns.
So, yeah.
Yeah, but
I was going to say United States 2025.
Well, yeah, just a bunch of thieves and brigands taking over. The king is just the most successful thief. That's why he sits with his back to the wall.
Mm-hmm. I haven't finished the comments, so.
Oh, we got to flash the T-shirt. Sell the merch.
Woo!
That we don't have.
Make the merch.
Yep.
So
I think the London Underground was started before the shogunate was over.
I believe you.
1863.
I was referring to the
to
originate. It's
1867.
like the British aristocracy all started basically as a bunch of brigands, but they also had a long history after that. So
yeah,
technically still there.
okay, so Fritz writes that while there's no mention to what happened to the rest of her body, it is assumed that the reader will still remember Elisha's pronouncement in 1 Kings 21:24, which was already repeated in the redactional verse in 9:10. Elisha prophesied that Jezebel would have no burial, so that her spirit would wander restlessly forever. Thus, quote, she has received the most severe punishment that was imaginable in ancient Israel, end quote. And finally, on 37, like dung on the ground. Hebrew for dung is domen. The word appears also in Jeremiah 8:2, 9:21, 16:4, 25:33, Psalms 83:11, and is rendered dung by early translations. Fritz writes that such a fate, quote, amounts to the destruction of a human life that can no longer exist in the shadowy realm of the dead, end quote. The Lucianic recension has the proceeding like Naboth's corpse, which McKenzie takes as a gloss tightening the prophecy fulfillment connection with 1 Kings 21, and enhancing the sense of justice in Jezebel's death as retribution for Naboth. That's it for my comment.
All right, dare we move on to 10?
We don't, because I got a shovel of the snow.
Snow?
Yeah, we had quite the snowstorm last night.
wow.
All right.
Though, I should probably say that my comment on 2 Kings 10 is probably shorter than the two previous comments that we had.
Okay.
Either way, I still got to shovel snow.
Yeah, I understand.
When we meet next week, it'll be 2 Kings 10.
Yes.
All right. Looking
10
forward
to
to it.
Kings.
Or 2 Kings 2, but the second 2 is binary.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Well, see you then.
Make sure you join the Discord.
Yes.
And
Yes.
join the Discord. Have all your
The
notifications
Discord.
on. Do that.
Yes.
Join it. Have you joined it yet? Join it now.
We had a very interesting. Well, I should say, Chrissy and Simone had a very interesting discussion on the Testimonium Flavianum.
Yeah,
Ooh,
historicity of
interesting.
Jesus stuff.
Yeah, the obvious, painfully obvious insertion, but
Maybe you should read their discussion.
it'll be
and for the
Well,
first
that-
time ever, they were able to discuss things and not be at each other's throats. But I think it's because they already like each other. So,
aw, that's
because whenever we get like some idiot in the Discord, Chrissy and Simone absolutely tear into them. So
good.
And then they rage quit.
Go, Chrissy.
It's been a while since we've had someone like good for debate. I remember like a while ago we had like in the voice channel like some guy who came from this show, but then they left because we were all mean to him.
Someone has to say bye because otherwise Lawrence can't shovel snow.
get the hell out of here, everyone.